Good evening. It is Monday, August 22nd, 2022, and the Southborough Planning Board meeting. It's now in progress. The first item on the agenda is the opening of a public hearing for 250 Turnpike Road, change of use storage facility, major site plan approval. Karina, do you want to make us our legal ad and get us going here?
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. It's the public hearing notice, major site plan approval for 250 Turnpike Road, Assessors Map 27, Parcel 2-A. Per section 17410 of the Southborough zoning code, the planning board of the town of Southborough shall hold a public hearing on Monday, August 22nd, 2022 at 7:05 p.m. in the Thomas J. McAuliffe Hearing Room, second floor, Townhouse, 17 Common Street, Southborough, Mass, to consider the application of FD 250 Turnpike LLC regarding the property at 250 Turnpike Road for major site plan approval. This public hearing is regarding the change of office space in an existing building to a self-storage facility on the 4.3 acre parcel located in an industrial zoning district with minor site improvements. A copy of the application and plans can be viewed at the planning office at the Southborough Townhouse during normal business hours or on the planning board's webpage, http://www.southboroughtown.com/planning-board. Any person wishing to be heard on the proposed plan should appear at that time and place designated or join the hearing by going online to www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. Mimi Luttrell, Chair, Southborough Planning Board. Thank you.
Very good. Welcome. Good evening, whoever is.
Good evening, I'm Brian Charvel on behalf of the applicant. I love a good podium. I wonder if I might slide that one over if you have a preference about where I place it.
Sure.
Great.
I don't know how heavy it is.
I
but
like it. That's always the risk.
I think you can do it.
If y'all stand on the left or stage right, and James can be on stage left.
And to the chair, I'm James Tatro from Aspen Land Design, also representing FD 250 Turnpike LLC.
Very good.
And I just would like to interject that anybody speaking from the audience, if they just give an effort to speak up a little bit extra, we have more microphones, but it would really help the audience.
Did
Thanks.
you hear those introductions, Karina?
I did. There's a little bit light, but you can hear them.
As far over there.
We'll be more operatic.
Yes.
Thank you.
It only goes as far, it only goes as far as the lines. So sure, you can put one
Look
there.
at that.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, Karina's the only one that can tell us if she can hear me.
She'll be our test. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the planning board. I'm Brian Charvel, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Ferris Development Group. I'm also a Massachusetts attorney, and therefore get to be Ferris's general counsel as well. And by way of background, I live in the town of Linfield, Massachusetts, and I serve and chair on the planning board there. Tonight, I'm here representing FD 250 Turnpike LLC, which is the owner of the subject property, 250 Turnpike Road in Southborough. That entity is one of our affiliates now as the property. Speaking of Southborough, our company, Ferris Development Group, is based here. Our headquarters is at 118 Turnpike Road, Suite 300. And we're proud to be a Southborough-based business. And coincidentally, our engineer, our civil engineer on the project, Mr. Tatro, is with Aspen Land Design, and they're also a Southborough-based business. And as you may know, Mr. Ferris, the owner of our company, grew up in Southborough and still lives on Sears Road. As Karina said in the introduction, we're here on major site plan approval for this site. And it's interesting, it's triggered only because what we're proposing is a change of use exceeding 2,000 square feet. As you may know, on the property right now is a 3-story office building. And that's how it's been used. You can see it on the site plan. It faces Turnpike Road for Route 9 and was built in the 80s. It's been occupied by mainly office tenants since then, but also for a long time was occupied by Kaz Engineering, who did some light manufacturing and assembly. Over the property's history, it's gotten now 3 special permits. One was around 1990 for light manufacturing and assembly. Another one was in the mid-90s, I think relating to signage. And then we got a third special permit just last week. Mr. Tatro and I appeared before the ZBA, and they granted a special permit unanimously without conditions for the change in use. That's why we were before that. So that allows the self-storage use in the industrial zone. As you can see on the site plan, the property boundaries are outlined in what you're seeing here in blue. The property is almost entirely in the industrial zone. There's just a sliver of it toward the southern bit that is in Residence A. So again, the use will be in, the self-storage use we've proposed will be entirely within the industrial portion of the property. Right now, there is significant natural features on the property. You can see that there are hash detention basins toward the south. And also in green is an extensive natural area that our work would not disturb. There's a pedestrian bridge that runs from the northeast corner of the office building through the woods over to the extensive park.
Excuse me, I just want to, perhaps Colleen, are you able to share the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sharing it here, but I'm not sharing it on the Zoom.
Is that possible? I just, so that the people who are watching remotely can understand. Sorry, Brian, I didn't want your information to go nowhere. Okay,
Thank
Is
you.
that better?
that's good, thank you.
In speaking,
Sorry, just one thing, and perhaps if you could move the easel so it's a little bit more angled towards.
If I angle it towards you, I'll be angling it away from the selectmen, so I.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can sit over here.
Yeah, it's your.
speaking of the natural features, several weeks ago, we began an effort with the Conservation Commission for them to work with us on an ANRAD, or abbreviated notice of resource area delineation, so that we and the town are on the same page about the protected wetlands. Our next hearing with the Conservation Commission on that is this Thursday. So again, we're here just because of the change in use. It's been self-storage and light assembly over time. And our proposal is for the existing building to be used for self-storage. The exterior of the building will remain the same, aside from minor lighting improvements and additions. The parking lot will remain the same. We just plan to do parking lot paving repairs and then install modern LED light fixtures in the parking areas. Utilities wise, there will be no changes. We're going to use the existing natural gas, water, and electric service. There will not be any upsizing required of those. There's already an existing septic system and leaching field underneath the large parking lot. And that's rated today at, I think, 5,400 gallons of flow per day. But the self-storage use is expected to have less than 500 gallons a day of flow. So the use will more than fit within the existing infrastructure of the site. Mr. Tatro will speak to this some, but he's looked at traffic counts. And the metric used for traffic from a self-storage facility is, of course, much less in terms of trip count than it is for even an office use. The trips fall from nearly 500 a day, or thereabouts, to about 80, using the traffic engineer's formulas. And that's based on the square footage of the building. And what is it, James? About 50,000 square feet?
Chair, it's the gross floor area of the building is 52,700 square feet. And when you use the traffic code 151 for a warehouse such as this, it generates 1.51 trips per 1,000 square feet. If it had been office, a general office use, it would generate 9.7 trips per 1,000 square feet. The net calculation is that an office use would generate 513 trips per day. And as Brian said, the proposed self-storage use is only expected to generate 80 trips per day. Now, people can quibble about exactly, if you're adequately accounting for contributing areas, et cetera, but those proportions are rather stark.
In terms of the work on the inside of the building, it will be a typical interior self-storage layout that you're probably used to seeing as you travel around town and other towns, so framing it. I think the latest architecture shows it would be 391 units within the building. They range in size, I think, from 5 by 5 to up to 10 by 25, but most are the small to mid-size units. You'll see on the site plan a note that there may be outdoor storage on the parking lot itself. That would just be if we found that there was customer demand for it, yeah, movable units that would not be climate controlled. So, those are the highlights. So maybe I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have. And aside from that, any details I missed that James would like to speak to.
No, I think you've covered it. Again, basics are that the infrastructure here is more than adequate in a couple of respects. I mean, radically decreasing the impacts relative to if it had remained in office use and been used as such.
And I guess I should note, everybody's familiar with uses around there. Our office is close to this. So to the west is Eagle Leasing. To the east on the same side of Route 9, down a little ways is the Cadillac dealership. Immediately across from this property is Rad Exotics car dealership. So this use does not stand out in any way, nor the use of the site. The layout of the site plan is not unique compared to neighboring properties.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation. Any questions, Mr. Knowles?
Yeah, thank you again. So can you explain the flow that you see for the storage itself, how you see people entering?
Happy to. If you enter directly off Route 9, as you may know, there is a exit lane headed eastbound that enables you to turn off into this property. And then right at our driveway, continuing further east, is an exit lane for Parkerville Road. And that begins in front of us and continues all the way down. So traffic can veer off to the right and then enter our driveway. Yep. And then traffic could turn left and there's a small rotary, a planted rotary right in front of the front door, like that white area. Exactly, the white area of the plan. Or one could go down to the right where there's a loading dock. If you want to show how that, yeah, exactly. Around to the back, there's an entry loading dock there. So we envision that while there might be some loading as a customer does like an initial drop off, for instance, via the dock, most coming and going would be at that small rotary at the front. So there you would pull in, enter through the front door, which is directly beneath that white area. That will remain unchanged. Pick up or drop off and then park.
So your 80 trips a day that you're anticipating are all through that first entrance, not the parking lot. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Really, aside from if there might be placement of outdoor units in the main parking lot, we expect very little use of that. It'd be staffed by one full-time person during the day. So there would be one staff car that would be there during regular business hours.
In the main parking lot.
At the main parking lot. The part of the lot adjacent to the building, really. That's kind of around 40 spaces. So, there's plenty of service there for anybody who would need it, including customers coming and going.
And the original flow though for the building was anticipating the parking lot handling the majority of the traffic.
That's right. When there's an office use, you needed that many spaces to get all the workers in. They'd park in the large lot further east, take the pedestrian bridge through the woods, and come back to the building.
Great. Just to further that, there are 17 spaces here on the west side of the building. And we would have another 20 that we would definitely still have available here immediately on the other side of the bridge. But again, imagine this is an office use with many more folks working there, many more trips to and from. We'd have a much greater use of this parking area because again, only 17 spaces.
And anticipated hours of operation?
Regular business hours, so 8 to 5. And that's we would have full-time staff there. But as I mentioned, the ZBA, we are looking into a card access system that could enable off-hours access, but we haven't decided on that yet. But that would give customers a card that they could use to get to their interior.
So if you're going to do that, then my next question is the lighting that you're anticipating. If you're going to have card access in almost 24 hours.
I think you're talking about the lighting at the entrance again.
I'm talking about the lighting for the entire site.
We did prepare a photometric plan showing actually replacement of essentially of existing lighting units with new LED at the same height. I believe they're mostly 20 feet now. And just basically updating them to be a less splashy, if you will, light fixture, and one that's more energy efficient. So we're not proposing to change, I guess, if there's anybody in the area who has no trouble with this now, they will have no trouble with this in the future, because we're not proposing to change the lighting of this area. Again, as I think Brian alluded to, there may be a little more lighting, especially just to highlight this property to drivers passing by on Route 9. But there's not going to be anything new seen. In fact, I'm sure we'll see less of the parking areas lighting. And just as a quick thing, one of the things that came up at the special permit with the ZBA, and we had a partial answer to it, but we weren't exactly sure. Actually, the nearest folks to this building are just short of 600 feet away through the woods. So the little bit of lighting that there is on this site, and they're actually significant uphill also. They're really not affected by the existing fixtures that are changed out to be more energy efficient in the same light.
I understand. And, I think, though, from what the town has been trying to do going forward with our lighting bylaw and everything, knowing the natural resource there in the middle, I can't really complain. But I think from a lighting perspective, going forward, if that parking lot area, the large lot to the right, is not going to be really utilized on a regular basis, be in favor of trying to reduce as much light as possible on that in the evening hours, to reduce light pollution in general in the town and promote any critters living in the natural resource. That's all I have for you.
Thank you.
Ms. Houlihan?
Sure. So I have a couple, since we're on lighting, let's talk about lighting. So part of our new light bylaw, I don't know, talk to you about the photometric plan. So the first part of it is we needed to calculate the total site lumen limit, and I couldn't find that on the plan. So it's really difficult for me to even comment on the site plan because we don't have a total site lumen plan. And it is 5 lumens per square foot of hardscape. And because you're in the LZ3, which is the moderately high ambient lighting industrial zone. So in that photometric plan, you'll need to include the total site limit and then what your photometric plan limit is, what it comes up with the lighting. I would actually concur with Mr. Mills if there's a way to kind of reduce the lighting around. I know you're using existing poles, but if you're not planning to use the parking area, do we need to illuminate it at all? Can you, eliminate some of those lights?
We will update the plan to address the concern you've cited.
And just looking at the lighting requirements, so it looks like the bug criteria meets specifications. It was unclear to me that no light would be emitted above 90 degrees. So it either has to be shielded or angled down. So I just want to ensure that because it's not entirely clear how you're going to mount these on the poles.
We'll absolutely add that.
The next was just on landscape. So you are looking for waivers relative to the landscape plan because you're basically, what I read is you're not putting anything new, you're kind of weeding, just cleaning it up. Except that you are removing, it looks like 4 oak trees and a hickory on this plan.
Yes. The couple of trees on the property, but near the right of way, which are sort of most, I guess, obstructive, if you will, of drivers approaching, seeing a side of the building.
Okay, so we are trying to do what we can for trees, and they're fairly large oak trees that you're removing as well as the hickory. So we would like to understand what you would be doing to replace the trees that you're removing.
Well, we could certainly offer a replacement in kind, obviously greater number, or replacement of same overall caliber dimension. For instance, a 10-inch tree is cut for visibility here, and then a total of at least 10 inches caliber width is on site, replaces that.
I think that would be, I mean, my recommendation, and if there's no place on site, even just to donate to our community. So if you know, let's just say you have to replace with 10 trees and you can't find placement for that, that there's kind of something that we can leverage to borrow across the town.
Definitely.
Signage, there was no signage detail in here. I heard on your zoning board meeting that you hadn't really thought through the signage yet because you haven't come up with a name. But are you looking to amend any of the sign requirements that are currently on site?
I'd like for us to, if possible, we're gonna try to stay within the existing monument. And
Okay,
then we'd just be talking about a wall sign facing Route 9.
okay, so,
There's an existing 36 square foot sign here, just to the side of the driveway, a black sign, which might have been installed by the CAS
yeah.
previously. And as Brian says, we try to make use of that as first choice, and if we have to come back somehow for revision or maybe we decide. But the first choice is to simply use that sign.
Okay, I also read that you're looking for 10-foot high security fencing, and I just wanted to understand why.
Mainly because of the potential
where?
storage of units in the larger parking lot,
Okay,
placement of temporary units there. We were concerned that without a taller fence, there would be accessibility. And I think especially if we're working toward limiting security lighting in the larger lot, we would feel better, more need for a taller fence to deter trespassers.
and where would the fence perimeter, where would you look to install that?
I'm gonna flip the page here because I
Is it
put
on one of the
the
plans?
second sheet, the site layout plan, which shows it it's underneath. This was the existing conditions plan, which a reasonable choice on this instance, they're not proposing to change any grades. The site layout plan shows, I'll just trace it off of the parking area adjacent to the abutter Firebird. Off the east side of the parking area towards Parkerville, off the south side of the parking area over here, and then running back in front of these spaces. And what we call for on the plans, a car or code operated sliding gate. And when we had a meeting with town staff, we were asked to show that we could stack up at least 2 cars here without getting into Route 9. And this is actually, if you want to call it the deceleration lane here. This isn't actually the travel lane of Route 9, but we can stack up 2 cars without even getting into the deceleration lane. Never mind, the 2 lanes heading eastbound. So that's the proposal for the fencing, is to fence in all this area, have a card or code access reader at the entrance here. And again, we can show that we have a couple of cars backup space.
So I guess my question then is, that's really not using a parking lot. That is a storage. That's almost a completely separate outdoor storage. I understand you're trying to understand and entertain whether you would need it, but I would see that as not just a repurposed parking lot. Now with this complete perimeter surrounded, and that gate does concern me a little bit. So the only access into that area, if someone made a wrong turn, they'd have to back out onto Route 9 if they don't have a key card. So
I think with 2 car lengths, there'd be room for a 3-point turn. They wouldn't have to back out to Route 9. And if they did, they would be backing into the decel lane, not into moving traffic.
And just quickly, this driveway access is actually 34 feet wide. It's actually quite bigger than normal.
Okay, I guess maybe that's more, maybe a question for this planning board to say, like, what is that space? Is that a parking lot or is that it's a storage facility? It's just not an internal storage facility. Okay, thank you for answering those questions. I think that's all I had with this submission.
Ms. Merlin?
Thank you for the presentation. I want to go back to traffic counts. The plans talk about 350, or I thought I saw 401 units. Is 80 counts per day typical? It's calculated on an office park, but does that translate to 401 units? Is that normal for 400 units?
Well, the IT trip generation is on the basis of that per 1,000 square feet of storage space. And that is over nationally, however many storage unit buildings there are, and presuming probably the typical or mean of larger units, smaller units, et cetera, per that 1,000 square feet. So unless the size of these units were exceptional in having a huge number of small units relative to the average of one of these facilities, it should be representative, and that figure of 1.51 trips per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area should be a reasonable estimate. And again, as I said, I think before, you know, traffic numbers are, I'm not on the traffic side of things, just on the regular civil site side. Traffic numbers can be quibbled with, especially when you're looking at contributing areas. But the difference between 513 trips for an office use and 80 trips for the per day with the self-storage use is such a stark difference that quibbling won't make up anywhere near that difference.
Right, but in an office park, you have mainly cars, vehicles, SUVs. I wonder what you can tell me, what percentage do you, of your vehicles do you expect to be trucks, delivery trucks, SUVs, or do you have sort of a guess of what that might be?
We don't have a guess, and we're not sure yet. We'd be catering to everybody, but as I mentioned to the ZBA last week, we are interested in serving some contractors. So if they could use that as a place to store tools, for instance, we would welcome that sort of business. And we think with more contractors, then they can build business relationships together as they get to know each other, maybe can refer business. And so that certainly could be truck driven. But I mean, we point to adjacent uses like Eagle, for instance, and I mean, there's large trucks there.
Right.
We would not expect semi-truck traffic, for instance, here, aside from maybe like an initial drop off, somebody filling up their unit. And it's really not a conducive layout to semi-trucks. It's kind of hard to turn in. It's very difficult to turn around. It's really geared toward not semis, but mostly delivery van, box truck, but more like that personal automobiles.
Yeah, and for the trucks that are carrying the automobiles and also these movable containers, I guess that's sort of like Eagle leasing, right? These containers. How are they entering? Are they entering this?
Sure. To pick a box truck or a vehicle carrying a car, I would anticipate comes in, backs up, has the back gate here, brings whatever materials inside. Again, and you can work this a couple different ways. A not too large box truck can still easily make this swing, but in, back up, and out. It's really essentially a big 3-point turn.
And what if they're carrying a storage container? Where's that container going to be dropped off? Where does it live? Where's it going to sit?
The only place on site where we would envision those movable containers would be on the large east parking lot. So they would enter at the driveway there, as we were talking about earlier, and offload somewhere in that lot, not the western lot.
Thank you. And I wanted to get a clarification on the hours, and I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to watch the zoning board of appeals. So you mentioned regular business hours.
We'll have a staff during those times.
And it will be staffed, but there could be somebody traveling from across the country, right, that's come in the middle of the night and they've got a truck and they're gonna be dropping off their stuff. So is there, What percentage of the time do you anticipate overnight use?
10% or less. We think it'll be infrequent. But we do have a plan already for security cameras and other security systems. to ensure it's safe when this opens.
Could I just remind everybody just to speak up a little bit for the sake of remote viewers?
And just the last question I have is really about noise. We have maybe some folks in the audience that are butters and like to hear from them too. But I'm just curious if you have any anticipation of, how noisy the place will be.
Aside from vehicles coming and going, we think it'll be silent. I mean, the activity really is inside the building. Thank you.
Sure.
Again, with the parking lot / outdoor storage. I start thinking of where I see some of those self-storage containers get dropped off at your house, they go away, they go somewhere, and then they can be stacked like 3-4 high. You're not gonna do that, are you?
Absolutely not. When we've looked at how many movable units, I guess you call it pod, how many pods could fit there, we've not looked at any stacking. Not at all.
No stack.
Yeah.
And when you talk about storage of tools, I mean, I think of a tool as a saw. Other people view a tool as a big excavator or.
Yeah, not equipment. Yeah, there won't be a means of getting such a piece of equipment inside.
I'm not saying inside, I'm saying outside. Are you gonna store them outside? Do you
No.
see like, I don't know, service company for industrial buildings and everything storing, big plow material or plow trucks or anything like that?
Yeah, that could happen. Yeah, I don't want to stand here and say that that is out of the realm of possibility with open parking like this as it is today.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. To continue on with what Andrew was saying, so if you've got large construction equipment being stored there and brought there in the middle of the night, is this fencing going to have any soundproofing to it?
We haven't looked at that yet. We've just looked at 10-foot tall privacy fence. Nothing, not something harder or that's designed to repel sound more than privacy fencing otherwise would.
So large construction vehicles with the backup alarms, but there's a card thing that they can go anytime.
No, I agree. I'm saying that, you said the service hours would be 8 to 5. You have a card and now you're talking, who knows when.
And
24/7.
we view it as an iterative process, so we would welcome the town's feedback, especially via this board, in terms of limitations on the hours of operation. For instance, for the open storage, it's one thing to come at 10 o'clock at night after you finished moving into a dorm, for instance, to use card access to get to a 5x5 unit inside the building, but another matter to drop off an excavator at 11 o'clock at night. That's
Yeah.
understandable.
Or to drop off a storage container at 11 o'clock. Those things concern me.
And that's kind of the nice thing about the technology and card access is we could simply prohibit, use of the card access system during certain hours for the open lot at the gate.
So have you started working on the building already?
So far, we have just done demolition, we're just clearing out the old office layout and opened it up. And then there's been some welding to start doing like floor reinforcements in certain areas and to make sure that the sprinkler system was functioning. That's it so far.
Colleen, could you pull up the picture of the site again from Route 9? So those mature, oops, I'm sorry. Those mature trees that are slated to be removed, you're saying those impede the sight of that sign?
No, there's also going to be a sign on, there is anticipated to be a sign on the building itself, depending upon, there's been no, what do I say, a tenant decided. If I'll make up a name, it's probably out there, Use Storage, or Use Store It, wants to put a sign on the building, and we just want it to be visible.
And as I said to the ZBA, our property manages the properties, our company manages the properties that we own. And so our hope is to self-manage. We're not interested in getting a permit and then handing it over to public storage or something like that. We hope to do it ourselves. So that's why we don't have a name yet, because we plan to come up with our concept.
Okay. So, thank you for being amenable to replace large mature trees, but large mature trees can't be replaced. And having, 10 little 2-inch trees does not replace a 30-foot tree. And our bylaw prohibits the removal of trees within 25 feet of the street that are 6 inches or greater. And I think those are all greater than 6 inches.
Are they greater than 6 inches, the one side, and I was just going to reach from the distance. Yep, those are within 25 feet, they're 15 to 18 feet.
So I would not be in favor of removing those mature trees. Also, the site plan shows that there's yew and shrubbery behind the sign, but that has all been removed. So the site plans are not the existing site.
That's right. There had been some juniper and some bushes around the monument sign and a transformer. That's just been cleaned up.
Well, they've been removed, so they're on the plan as the existing,
Yeah.
but that's not true.
Yeah, we were gonna have the plan updated, but I think we were waiting to get through tonight's hearing before we proceeded with the next revisions.
Okay. And then you had mentioned, so you didn't include a landscape plan because it appears you want to use the existing landscaping to meet the requirements of the landscape bylaw. But
We did include a landscape plan, it's sheet L3 and set.
so that has plants that you'll be planting.
It's primarily concerned with the areas where significant pruning and removal was taking place. I was just reading some of the different notes.
So it's a landscape removal plan?
Well, it's a landscaping plan, but in this case, much of the landscaping that exists was just overgrown. Some of it was blocking lights, some of it was over hydrants, other infrastructure, the big box in the front, and some of that, what was denoted on the landscaping plan was the fact that maintenance taking place.
So it looked like those islands there in that parking lot where all the landscaping was being removed.
Yes,
So the plan says that cleaning up and saving the existing pear trees, but that's not true.
I think they've been removed.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive. So this L3 is erroneous at this point. Oh, and then so there's a discrepancy between S2 and L3. S2 says 6 existing trees to be removed, and then L3 says existing chestnuts to remain,
Adjustments.
maples to remain.
I was gonna say, I think that's a typo, and they're not chestnuts. We wish we could get chestnut trees in this area to be 10 and 15 inch diameter, and much more as they were in decades gone by. Unfortunately, all you have to find is a scraggly 1 inch or 2 inch diameter woods before before things die out of the light. So that's actually a typo. So,
Oh, and one more thing on the landscape. So all that landscaping in the parking lot has been removed, so there's no concern. It says you're gonna clean up the barberry. But that barberry is an invasive species, so anything gets removed, I would think that would be removed.
Yep.
So it appears the use is wholesale distribution and storage. Is there going to be distribution?
No.
And on the lighting, it appears that there is light trespass, which is not allowed past the lot line.
We'll be sure that's addressed as we look at the limits.
Okay.
Comply with the law.
And although you said the nearest residence is 600 feet in the back, there is a house right on the corner there, Parkerville, isn't there?
correct, fiber.
So that's under 600 feet.
Also, yes, from that building.
And from the lighting in the parking lot. would be my
Yes,
concern.
from the existing lines. Yes. I think the question had been with the ZBA of if a truck came in here and would this be an intrusive thing or an annoyance or irritation to folks in the area? And actually, that's about over here is not so different from to Firebird in the corner, where again already has the nine folks. From the folks on Sarson Stone.
Understood.
I'm sorry, James, could you say that last sentence one more time? What was happening?
I was just saying that part of the discussion with the ZBA in regard to the special permit was about, in regard to noise, was, well, where are other houses in the area relative to, I think what was being discussed at that moment was where there's the loading dock. And I was just pointing out that the distance, to put a scale to it, would be pretty close. This is probably about 500 feet, where this is 590 feet to the nearest house on Sarson Stone. So, and these folks already are subject to Route 9.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's all. I have anything else from the board?
Just one additional comment. I know you added the light trespass. It's just more about, maybe it's the labeling, but it wasn't clear when I was going through your plans. Like I couldn't understand what the red lines were. So if you could help label specifically the lighting plan. And that's in our bylaw too, what we're looking for specifically. I know you've included the packet, but there are other requirements that just need to be in the actual plan. So.
Mimi, I had a couple questions as well after the planning board members are done.
Sure. Karina?
All right, I think you already touched on the light trespass off the property to meet the lighting code. Was it clear what the correlated color temperature was for the specification? So James, we would need to have that information if it's not on the lighting photometric plan now, or in the specification, something that indicates the correlated color temperature, because there's specific requirements that you can't go over certain temperature, and that's for blue light reduction in town and our dark skies initiative.
And that's less than or equal to 3,000 Kelvin. I think many of your lights had shown different levels between 4,000 and 5,000.
We will address that.
And then To the south, on the residentially zoned property, which will have a future development potential. There's a couple things. There's the parking lot that I believe will, in the large parking lot to the south that actually encroaches on the second piece of property. Am I seeing that wrong?
No, that's correct, and we would create a easement to allow the continuation of use of this strip of pavement by the property at 250.
Okay, and then when you're abutting residentially zoned property, I believe there's requirements for certain types of buffers for landscaping. Maybe you could just explain briefly how that would be achieved, or if there's something existing there that would buffer any residential development to the south?
Well, right now, from that physical parking area to the next butter, sorry, I'm frantically looking at my scale to find the 30 scale. This is 160, just over 160 feet.
But I mean, if something if there's residential construction, if there's a residential development of any kind there, it's not just, from the existing storage facility to a property beyond the former complete lot. How will you, is there, anything you're gonna do to buffer the storage facility from the immediate abutter?
Well, one of the things again talked about was a 10-foot high fence with the first intention of which was safety and security, but which the board members cited as possibly being constructed in such a fashion as it would provide some noise reduction. And with those factors, we believe that would provide that buffer.
Okay, thank you. And I'd also like to just point out that we are awaiting Fuss and O'Neill's review comments from your first submission. I know that it's been a little bit longer than normal, but we're in summertime, there were various vacations on their part as well. So I spoke with them today and they're anticipating by the end of this week to provide those review comments, and we'll forward those immediately to you. So you can have any additional comments as well, so.
Thank you.
I just have one further question. How far does that parking area go into the residential?
That is just over the depth of one space, 21 feet, 22 feet. I think very slightly, because it's not exactly the same angle as the zoning line, which is on this property.
Anyone in the audience have a question? Sure, if you could come up so we could hear you.
Yeah, I had a question, another question about the lighting in the
Sure.
parking lot.
Your name, sir?
Yeah, my name is Fred Harvey, 129 Parkerville.
Very good.
Initially, at the first site review, the town was advocating or suggesting that the light towers be half height. They were suggesting that they not be as tall as they are right now. And at the time, they suggested that Farrow Volvo across the street, which is now Rad Exotics, they have the lower light stanchions, and that was never done in the parking lot. But I see that occasionally on some of the office buildings in Southborough. Would we want to entertain that to cut down on the extra light pollution?
It's reasonable. ask.
I
Right
think
now
it's a reasonable ask.
20-foot pole is an existing 20-foot pole and an existing 8-foot pole. So I think it's reasonable.
And just one other question, will there be any electricity available in the parking lot, say off of those light poles. In case anybody has a storage facility, they may want to do a little work out there. Somebody, if there's gear or equipment, or if there's somebody who is in a commercial environment, they may want to do something like that. Or any plans like that?
I think we'd probably shy away from it because we wouldn't be able to control and who knows how people start using electricity once it's available and just shut it, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
John Palmer, 131 Parkerville, and I do know there's a number of people on Zoom, residents and abutters that have questions as well.
Yep.
But my question, an initial question anyhow, is with regard to the use of the property and the wholesale storage aspect versus the commercial storage aspect of it. So this doesn't sound like traditional self-storage, commercial self-storage. It sounds more like wholesale, business-to-business self-storage. There's even mention of consumer research and test labs in the site plan. So I'm just wondering, I'm looking for clarification as to the use of the self-storage.
Yeah, not at all in terms of business to business. This, like I said, it's self-storage. It's whether it be a individual homeowner or a business person, it is still them coming and going to and from their unit. That's it. It's not, when I mentioned business to business, that's encouraging contractors to make referrals to one another. That's it. It's not the sale of any goods or services. It's not, one having storage or warehousing or wholesale and then selling to or distributing to others from this site. It is a place to store things and take them elsewhere. That's it.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Jeff Boileau, 133 Parkerville Road. Just one quick follow-up on that. What types of things will be stored at the facility? It's non-traditional. When you have residents and people going in and storing goods they can't keep in their homes, there was mention also of trucks and construction equipment, things like that being stored there. Is that correct? Or I guess what's the breadth of storage you're proposing for this?
Well, the plan is for it to be typical self-storage. So the typical client is going to be a homeowner who has things they can't fit in their attic. They're going to store those things there. But we're not going to limit it only to that. It could be available to contractors as well. But as I said, all right, the equipment storage, if we did it at all, would only be in the large parking lot next to it.
There could be trucks, construction equipment, large, okay.
I mean, those things could be parked there now.
I guess I would maybe just express a concern about the traffic, which was raised there, the safety. So I've been living at 133 for 18 years, and I've made that jaunt over the hill coming Route 9 East. It's a 55-mile-an-hour zone, and you very, very quickly have to get over into the right-hand lane and slow down your car really, really quickly. And when it's winter, it's a safety concern. My concern there is that it's high speed coming up over a hill. It's a blind, very quick turn into Parkerville. What if you suddenly have, huge equipment and just really any amount of increased traffic coming out from 250? So I guess that leads me to my question is what's the safety plan to mediate that? I think that would be something to consider, just a concern frankly, a traffic safety concern. There's no traffic coming out of 250 now, and even now, it's sometimes hard to work your way over to take that right onto Parkerville. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say, I guess, I know it's theoretical, whether it be, when we talk about whether it's self-storage use or office or something else in terms of the vehicle counts. That's traffic scientists telling us the numbers to use. We feel good about the fact that there are already the lanes there that there are. So the decel lane, as you approach 250, at the first entrance, it coincides with an acceleration lane coming down the hill from Eagle. But what it's doing is creating more width there for entering or exiting. And then beginning at the first entrance is that entire turn lane to turn on. We'd be open to other changes that could be made, but there's just not a lot of room to add more than basically the Excel decel lane that runs the full length of the property. We made a point before even filing, having a review with town staff. And the chief of police did look at it, and he pointed out the concern about vehicle stacking and wanted to make sure that at least any gate is inset far enough that at least there's a 2-car lengths and then the width for a 3-point or other turnaround to get headed back out onto.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah,
sure.
Eagle Leasing has the advantage of the kind of on-ramp and off-ramp from their facility, where there's kind of a long lead of trucks, for trucks to go in, and then a long kind of, off-ramp to go to ease into traffic. That's not the case when you get to 250, just because you run out of space there. So that's, I guess, the one thing that kind of lacks in 250 is you don't have kind of that easement, if you will, into traffic,
And I realize that second lane that begins at our second entrance is more than anything a turn lane on Parkerville, so a decel lane. But it is so long, it's a quarter mile probably. So it can serve as an acceleration lane departing 250.
But to echo Jeff's comments, I've lived on this road for 12
Excuse me,
years
could
now.
I just ask that the people introduce themselves
John
and so that
Palmer.
we can hear them? Thank you.
John Palmer, 131 Parkerville, and I would just echo Jeff's concern about the it's right at that turn in on Parkerville in the time that I've lived in town. So I would echo Jeff's, traffic and safety concern heading into Parkerville, and look for some sort of accommodation to address that.
I would just remind everybody, by right, there's hundreds and hundreds of spaces in that parking lot for office use today for 30 years. So that's deceleration and acceleration that's happened for decades. And it could resume today if we wanted to go ahead with office use by right.
Daytime traffic.
And so we're reducing it by nearly 80 or 90% with the self-storage, according to traffic engineers.
Contractor storage, do you envision that to be stuff that they can't fit in their attic, or is that coming in every morning and leaving every?
It could be, I don't want to rule that out, but it's not a lumberyard
Or contractor base?
or a contractor base.
Yes, sir.
Alex Gilman, 5 Starsonstone. Just to speak to what these two are saying. I moved here a week ago, and turning on to Parkerville, I've never done it before. It's not safe. And I can only imagine people that are new to the area, new to self-storage, bigger machinery coming in, it could be a hindrance. And I can only imagine it's just not gonna go over all that well, at least turning on to Parkerville or turning on into the self-storage area.
Thank you. There's somebody on Zoom, do you want to come in?
Judy Munsell.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you very much for accepting my question. I've actually got a couple, if that is okay.
Yeah, could you just state your address?
Sure, 7 Schuyler Drive.
Thank you.
So this first one I think is for Mr. Chevelle. Can you talk about the Ferris's experience in developing and managing this type of use?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all that.
Could you talk about the Ferris company's experience developing and managing this type of use?
This will be our first self-storage project, but we've, for more than a decade, done real estate development projects of all different types in Southborough and other towns.
And so to that what kind of analysis has been done to demonstrate an actual need for this in the community?
We know what the general demand is for self-storage in the Boston area and across the United States and how much that's going to grow.
What is that demand?
Come again?
What is that demand?
We still
Is
don't
it a number per capita? Is it like what? I mean, so Boston is a very, much denser urban area than Southborough. I'm just trying to understand like order of magnitude, like how many are needed based on, where you guys see the demand in this market.
Yeah, I don't have maths to tell you precisely what the demand is. We think it's the right way, as you've seen elsewhere in the Route 9 corridor, to activate this site that has been vacant for more than 6 years.
Understood. It just seems like this is the kind of the lowest possible use of land that you could have. It doesn't employ anyone. It doesn't generate much of anything in terms of tax revenue other than some incremental real estate taxes. I mean, it seems like the only value proposition here isn't really to the community. It's to parish development. So in that, like, we understand that there's a larger parcel in the back, this residential parcel. And so if the plan as proposed is moved forward, then, James has brought up this trip count a couple of times, but it seems like if this proposed moves forward, the only access that the back residential parcel would have would be through Parkerville. Because I mean, what kind of trip count would that do by adding 50 plus units of multifamily housing to Parkerville? Like, why can't you save that parking lot and instead of putting outdoor storage on it, have a right of way access to the back parcel through that?
I would just note, Madam Chair, we're only before the
Yeah,
board
we're
on
only
this
talking
major
about
site
the
plan.
site plan.
And as Mr. Munsell and I have discussed, there are alternative accesses to the rear parcel besides Parkerville Road.
No, Madam Chair, I understand, and I'm not trying to move the ball. I'm just trying to understand that if this is proposed as is, the opportunity to add a means of ingress and egress that is not through Route 9, I'm just not sure what those options are if that entire parking lot is going to be dedicated to outdoor storage.
Yeah, we can only address what's before us, and that is the major site plan for the self-storage.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Thank you for taking my questions.
For the record, we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 attendees at this time. No hands raised.
My name is Blair Sutherland. I live at 139 Parker Road. So I have two questions, one of which goes back to the original opening discussion and has been mentioned before, the sliver of commercial property or sliver of the resident A property that has been, it sounds like by zoning board, allowed to be incorporated within this particular proposal in front of the board today. My question, I guess in general, is there anything that would, by allowing this property or this plan to go forward, would that replace any kind of restriction on, or either advantageous or disadvantageous to the use for the residential property that has been discussed that is not in front of this board now? I'm just trying to get a sense as to whether there's any impact by the board, by the planning board, should you decide to approve this plan as it is today. Does that question make sense to you?
Would that piece of parking lot in the residential have any effect on the development of the residential parcel?
Would by this being approved today, or being approved by the planning board, whenever that takes place, does that sliver of land that is on the residential side of the property, would there be any negative effect or would it affect any further use of the residential property if that were to go forward? Because a slice has been cut out of that.
I don't, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. You wouldn't know until you were trying to do something else with the other land to see if somehow there was any impact from it. I couldn't say at this time.
I don't see any zoning wise. No.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John Palmer again, 131 Parkerville. So when I bought our property 12 years ago, I did a lot of research into the development of the existing commercial property, and I understood there to be a number of restrictions put on the use of the parking lot. So I just ask that we refresh and look at those restrictions on the use of the parking lot, and is this proposal in keeping with those restrictions? It doesn't seem like it would be.
Okay, anything, anyone else online? No. Okay. So we're looking to continue the hearing.
I'll make a motion, continue the hearing for 250 Turnpike Road, change of use, storage facility, major site plan approval to September 12th, 2022 at 7:05 p.m.
And do I have a second?
Could I have just a point of discussion? I don't know if this is out of turn, but will this be enough time for the applicant to turn around the information if he receives the Fuss and O'Neill comments at the end of this week?
Yes.
We believe so, but I guess it would obviously be dependent upon exactly what is the nature of those comments.
Correct.
So obviously, if we cannot address them in sufficient time, we would send in a letter, ask to continue, but we will try to be ready for the September 12th meeting.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, is there a deadline for submissions of updated materials before the 12th?
So the Wednesday before?
There's a 7-day period. It's on the major site plan application. Says that any new information provided for a planning board meeting or public hearing shall be received 7 days prior, so that we have a chance to distribute and the planning board has a chance to review the information.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, Latrell, yes.
Mills, yes.
Kingman, yes.
Here, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. We'll try and get.
Happy Labor Day.
started.
See you in September.
Yeah, see them. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the opening of the public hearing for the tree protection bylaw. You want to update us on this, Karina?
Yes. 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to read the legal ad, and just to note that I believe this is a general bylaw, so a public hearing was not required by state law. However, the planning board, in an effort to always be transparent with the public on initiatives for town meeting, wanted us to have this as a public hearing. So I'll read the public hearing notice and then I'll give you a quick little update. Public hearing notice, Town of Southborough. The Southborough Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, August 22nd at 7:10 p.m. in the McAuliffe Hearing Room, second floor, Townhouse, 17 Common Street, Southborough, Mass. 01772, to review a proposed general bylaw amendment for special town meeting warrant article to add a section to chapter 153 trees for a tree bylaw. The intent of the bylaw is to put in place a process for the maintenance of public shade trees, including but not limited to trimming, cutting, planting, and the removal of dangerous or damaged trees within the public right-of-way, and to protect the town from unnecessary tree removal and to maintain the New England character and charm of the town of Southborough. A copy of the application plans can be viewed at the planning office at the Southborough Townhouse during normal business hours or on the planning board's webpage at www.southboroughtown.com/planning-board. Any person wishing to be heard on the proposed plan should appear at the time and place designated or join the hearing by going online to www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. And just to get everybody up to date, the legal ad was filed with the town clerk. It ran in the newspaper on August 8th and August 15th in order to hold the public hearing opening this evening on the 22nd. The legal ad was sent to various towns and agencies as required and distributed to the town departments, which brings us to this evening. So everything should be in order for a public hearing. And that's what I have.
Very good. And just to remind everyone that this warrant article was before the annual town meeting, and the planning board was asked by the select board to postpone it to a special town meeting. And so we had hearings for the annual town meeting, and as Karina had mentioned, it's a general bylaw. They aren't required, but we believe in transparency at the planning board, so we had hearings then, and we're reopening and having hearings now. And just as an update, the bylaw is very much the same as what was presented, or what was to be presented at the annual town meeting and was presented during the hearings at that time, except for since that time, it was discovered that due to an act of the state legislature, the select board are the tree wardens in Southborough. So I went through and updated some of the language to reflect that. And to the select board has a tree warden designee, Chris Leroy, presently, and updated some of the language to reflect that the select board is the tree warden, and the tree warden designee is that person designated to fulfill the administrative duties of the tree warden by the select board. And the other thing is that I have been discussing the tree fund. We had originally thought we would do a revolving fund, and it was suggested by a few of the select board members that they didn't think that was the best avenue to take. And that it's best to do a line item in the budget, I guess. I'm so not a financial person, but something that town meeting would vote to fund every year. And so there was some wording in the Dropbox related to that. And still working with Chelsea on that. My main concern is that funding be specified for tree planting and not shared with tree removal, because planting money will remove trees. So that's my right now. I do have the PowerPoint. Should we do the PowerPoint that same one that was done before, just to
Yeah.
keep people up to date. So the PowerPoint is extended except for its warrant article number 1.
And you just have to share it on Zoom too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that is confirmed, it's still number one.
We are number 1. We're number 1 in the draft warrant. Oh, my little notes are here. So there are many reasons to protect public shade trees. Public shade trees are trees that are in the public right of way and owned by all the residents of Southborough. And aesthetics is just one of them. Next slide, please. Trees reduce flooding, erosion, and heat, as we found out in the past few weeks. It's much cooler in the shade. They clean the air, provide cooling, improve mental health, provide habitat, and increase property values. Additionally, public shade tree protection is required by Mass General Law. Massachusetts, oh, next one. Massachusetts was one of the earliest states to recognize the importance of public shade tree protection. Starting in 1896, an act to provide for the preservation of public shade trees was passed. 3 years later, 1899, all towns and cities in Massachusetts were required to have a tree warden. Next.
It's off Zoom. It's off Zoom now.
It should be on Zoom.
We lost the presentation on remote. We don't have it. While you're finding that, I can just add in the middle, Mimi, you were talking about the tree fund and what the approach is, and it's similar, it's my understanding, it's similar to how like the facilities department has their funding, where every year a certain amount is allocated to facilities to keep things, you know, to update and keep the facilities in order. And if you don't use it all, it doesn't mean you don't get more added to it the next year. You kind of build so that you have a fund that's readily available for tree planting and tree purposes.
Right, currently the draft language has tree planting, maintenance, and tree removal all together. I just want to make sure that there is funds that are dedicated to tree planting and that removal doesn't take planting funds. So the public shade tree law in Massachusetts is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 87. It has many of the same provisions as its predecessor, but goes into greater detail. It outlines the powers of the tree warden, procedures for removing of public shade trees and planting of public shade trees, and the penalties for the violations. Additionally, Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 15C augments Chapter 87 and provides additional protections for public shade trees on scenic roads. Southborough has a long history of protecting its scenic beauty and small town charm. In 1974 and 1975, several roads were designated as scenic roads. In 1978, all non-numbered public roads were designated as scenic roads. In 2019, Southborough further bolstered its commitment to public shade tree protection with the passage of the tree bylaw, which they designated the town as a tree city. And today we're taking the next step to formalize the process to comply with the shade tree and scenic road laws. Why another public shade tree bylaw? even after 126 years of public shade tree protection, it's not being consistently followed locally. Although we have been working on a process and are getting better. This bylaw clarifies our obligations under Chapter 87 and Chapter 40, Section 15C. The planning board used other towns as a guide for the bylaw that we are requesting be adopted. Next. What does the proposed bylaw do? It clarifies the shade tree law and scenic road law by defining terms, setting clear standards and procedures, and establishes a consistent process. Having a local bylaw is easier to find and easier to follow, making compliance easier. It only applies to public shade trees, and those are trees in the public right of way. What does the proposed bylaw not do? It does not infringe on personal property rights. It only applies to trees that are in the public right of way. It does not impede the removal of trees that are an eminent hazard to people or property. And the tree protection bylaw follows the shade tree law, the compliance of which is required by all cities and towns in Massachusetts. What is the public right of way? So this is an example of a standard residential road conforming to current subdivision regulations. Typically, the entire road layout is required to be 50 feet. 24 feet of that layout is paved, and the remaining portion is the right of way, which houses curbing, sidewalks, and public shade trees. The right of way becomes public when the road is accepted by town meeting. And it's important to understand that not all Southborough roads were built to current subdivision standards, and the depth of the public right of way varies. We've received a lot of questions regarding the protecting the roots under the tree strip line. And the reason to do that is that it protects the health of the tree. Protecting the root system is the first defense in maintaining the health of the tree. The support roots keep the tree upright. Destruction of them makes the tree unstable. The feeder roots deliver water and nutrients to the tree. Their destruction can starve the tree, which is why root system protection is so important. Oh, yes. Oh, I forgot to change that article. We're one. Article 1.
Well done.
Yes, so I have actually talked to some people, and I think that it's worth kind of voicing concern, because I think it would probably be voiced on town floor.
Sure.
So the concern that was expressed to me were a couple. One, with the town kind of starting to make a path with current trees, all the tree hearings that we just had. The question was, do we really need this type of legislation to be able to kind of mitigate if we are moving in the right direction now? That was kind of the first concern that was expressed to me. The next was just on fines and the worry about fines. And if this tree bylaw were to go into effect and we wait for the AG's office, is it that 3 to 4 months people start tearing down trees before it comes into play because of the costs associated with replacement? and what that could potentially mean if like a good, like I were looking to plant trees, for example, and so trees now could be $5,000 to $7,000 when I thought it was gonna be like $750. So people are worried about the cost for replacement.
If they take down a healthy tree.
Yes.
So currently, there's a process in place, although it isn't as specific as the bylaw would be. And the bylaw lays out exactly what the town needs to do to comply with chapter 87 and with the scenic road bylaw, which the town has not done. And I've been working on this for over 4 years, and it's taken a few weeks ago, we had the first consolidated hearing that complied with Mass General laws and then with the scenic road bylaw. So although we do have Mass General law, this brings it closer to home. So we know specifically in Southborough the steps to take that we need to follow to protect public shade trees if we want to remove a public shade tree. So yes, I think it's necessary. And as far as removing a public shade tree,
I guess if there's caps, maybe it's the question of fines, would there be caps on it? I don't know, I think it's more about the cost associated with not knowing, finding out you removed a public shade tree in the right of way, and then now having to pay $7,000 because they didn't realize it. It's just something for us to consider, I guess.
Yeah, so how do you manage someone who truly didn't know compared to someone who knows and just like, oh, the cap is this. That's a difficult.
that is worth discussion. I don't think the fines have been set yet, because that's part of the bylaw that the rules and regulations and fines and fees get set, and they need to be approved by the select board. Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. So it's not in the law itself, it's in the policies that would be supplemental to these.
Yes.
Much like what we've done on the lighting bylaw.
Yes.
Yeah.
So could I just ask a quick question, Mimi? There are fines in MGL for cutting down or trimming a tree when you're not allowed to. That I don't know off the top of my head, it's either $300 or $500 per offense. Then is there also MGL? I just can't recall on replacement. Was there language in the MGL about when you do want a tree replaced? So is that what was introduced in this public shade tree protection bylaw in one of the sections? And is that something that's proposed, like Marnie was just saying, into a policy that gets, that doesn't require town meeting vote for one thing, but I just want to get clarification on these two different avenues. You have MGL, and that's reflected in the bylaw. And then there's a section about, replacing trees that have been removed. So there's a fine, and then there's a requirement to replace. And because you can't replace a huge tree, there are numbers associated with, based on the size of the tree cut down. Say you have a 20-inch tree that was cut down, and the proposed bylaw says, well, you need to replace that with X amount of trees somewhere.
2 for 1.
2 for 1. So what Marnie's referring to, the question was on, there's a monetary fine in addition to that MGL fine, based on the size of the tree. And you know, we don't have to answer that now because we're gonna, I would guess the planning board's gonna continue these public hearings all the way to special town meeting. But just, and I will review the bylaws again from previously. Maybe to answer my own question, but if you knew that. Just a point of thought.
Karina, it's Debbie. I just wanted to maybe respond. So if I could just do a little reading. So general law, chapter 87, section 3-5, relating to the trimming, cutting, or removal of public shade trees, says a person shall be fined up to $500 for each
Right.
separate offense as provided general law, chapter 87, section 6. Any person who violates any provision of this bylaw, but not provisions of general law 87, shall be subject to fines up to $300 for each separate offense. That's the 300 and 500. These are
Correct.
fines. Each act causing damage to a separate tree shall constitute a separate offense. Each day the violation continues shall constitute a separate offense. So I think what we're talking about is being consistent with Mass General Law and not getting creative. And then the final thing is that the fines shall be assessed and collected under General Law, Chapter 40, Section 21D process. So I think it's important for the public to know that we're not trying to get creative, that this is, trying to get some consistency. We're trying to, kind of turn the ship around, to be honest, and head into the direction where we're in compliance with the laws that are already there. And I don't know what to say to the people who are, don't like overregulation, but there's been several instances, for example, where people have gone to work and they come home and their favorite tree on their street was cut down. And so I think it's a balance between, how to deal with the right for someone to cut down a tree versus a tree that's in the public way, that's for the enjoyment of the whole community. And I think that what we've done here, the planning board has done, is kind of struck the balance between trying to just really follow the law and not stray too far from the law, so that, we protect the trees that we're protecting, and also, are able to charge the fines, which, let's face it, $300 to $500 is not much of a deterrent. I don't know how long that's been on the books, but many, many towns are also charging fees. So what they're doing, some of the towns have gotten more creative, and maybe the Southborough will get creative, where they say, okay, anything over a foot in diameter is a valuable tree because you can't go to the nursery and replace that tree. So in that case, they'll assign some dollar figure per inch, and that will be a fee. But the law talks about the willful cutting. So to Andrew's point, I mean, I don't know how you deal with that. If somebody really doesn't know and cuts down a tree, feels very badly, I wouldn't say that's willful, versus someone who's clear cut their whole property and all the public shade trees that go with it. They should have known better. That would be a difficult situation.
And what I think that this whole process is helping with right initially is that it makes awareness that there is a tree warden, and that if you are going to cut down a tree and you have any question, it's probably in your best interest to make that phone call and just reach out to the tree warden designee to determine, hey, could you come look at this tree? Work with me, let me know. And, that's not a big task to at least start that, ask that question.
Is there any way to reach out to the tree companies who do majority work in the town too, to let them know, like, hey, you got to partner with us, and not make them liable, but if, they should know.
Well, if they work in the state, they should know, because this is state law, it's not a Southborough thing. But to your point, either they don't know or they're not necessarily concerned with that.
I mean, most of the time, if they're gonna get, the public shade trees that we're most concerned about is not gonna be taken down by your average homeowner with a 12-inch electric chainsaw
Right.
or a bandsaw that they're cutting themselves. They're gonna hire someone, they're gonna come in and do it. And I think we need, somehow get the partnership of the tree companies to understand, hey, if you're gonna be doing this, you gotta reach out because you could be fined as well for maybe the fine is not only to the homeowner, but the individual
Right.
takes it down. And if the homeowner says, hey, I partnered with XYZ tree company and they didn't say anything, then maybe you let them slide once. That's how we notify it, and then say, now you're on board. Happens again, you're going to be fined X number of dollars.
Yeah, I like that idea. As far as outreach and on.
Most tree companies do ask for some sort of a certificate, even if it's you're allowed to cut something down. There is a administrative allowance for up to 10 trees in a wetland. But yeah, you can.
But you can't cut anything down in the wetland without going for a compound.
If it's in the buffer, I should correct that, I'm sorry, if it's in the buffer zone, you can take down some, but it's an administrative thing, up to 10. Most people wouldn't sign off on that, they would take it to the Conservation Commission.
Yeah, I thought anything in the buffer had to go to the Conservation Commission within 100 feet.
If it's a hazard or something that needs to come down right away, there is a roundabout administrative. way.
Oh, yeah, well, if it's a hazard.
Yeah, and it's not just wetlands, it's also open space restricted areas that we have to be careful of. And we field a lot of questions on those types of trees as well. And, you know, it's the conscientious people who will call in and say, I have this condition in my open space area. And it's great that they're aware of their open space area, first of all. And then second, that they're calling about the tree. And we try to guide them and, you know, work with the tree warden, maybe have him go out there or encourage him. You know, we kind of put the two people together, the tree warden designee and that person asking the question about that. And we also look at the open space restrictions to see the specific requirements of that particular open space area. But I think that the gist is that, like Debbie said, and like Mimi and the rest of the planning board members are saying, this is not creation of anything new. This is clarification of what's on the state law already, just to help people be informed, have a local go-to resource. Everybody knows where MGL is, but some of that lingo is kind of tough to navigate, and go find it. If you have it in your town code, I think it's an easier way to resource the information, and it's just clarifying it. Educating people, and then there'll be less infraction because of that, I think. Just my 2 cents.
Karina, when people have questions on trees, are they calling you, or are they calling DPW, or? The reason I ask is I went looking online on DPW for any kind of, you know, if you have questions on trees, contact the tree warden designee or something, and I didn't see anything like that. And I wonder if kind of during this education period before our town meeting, whether, you know, if people have questions, who can they go to? Like, I hope.
Well, I can tell you that most people call planning first for anything based on the number of calls we get. And if we give them a little precursor of what we know, and then we point them in the right direction. And if it's our jurisdiction, then we clarify, you know, where they can find the application for scenic road, stone wall, and tree removal. And we explain the process a little bit up front, and then we tell them, when you're ready to do this and you're going to move forward, you come in, make an appointment at the office, and we'll sit down with you and look at your information and help you get your application requirements clear. So that's kind of our process. We do get calls. I can't tell what, I'm sure the DPW gets plenty of calls as well because they, they log them in spreadsheets because of, the budget and trying to not negotiate, but keep track of what needs to be removed once it gets approved and all that. We do it more on an informative level and then look back at restrictive documents from the permits as far as conditions or mitigation of, okay, they promised 3 trees here in the condition, did they do that? And then we try to follow up on those kinds of things.
Anything else?
Good job.
So do we need to continue the public hearing? Is that how that works
Yeah.
with even these?
Yeah, we keep it open typically.
Or so just keep it open? We don't need to vote to continue?
No, we vote to continue it
Okay.
if someone wants to come. So I make a motion, we continue the public hearing for warrant article 1. Tree protection bylaw.
We have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, am I allowed to public comment during?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, Grant Barrington, 58 Black Road. Just for the purpose of the public, I saw in the packet that the actual. current
I'm
draft-
sorry, could I have to just is that Kevin Farrington? Could you just go up to the podium, please? So, because that's where the microphone is and then we can
We
see.
moved it.
Oh, okay, you moved it. Okay.
Grant Barrington, 58
Oh,
Flag Road.
Grant, I'm sorry, yeah.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, so I saw in the packet that there was the current bylaw, tree protection bylaw wasn't posted, so I was just wondering, moving forward with future public hearings, would it be possible to include a current draft so that people can take a look?
Oh, sure. My apologies. The draft isn't in the packet?
No, did you look under news and announcements where we put the public hearing documents? So we have a public packet that we put near the agenda, and that's usually non-public hearing information. We do that as a
Okay.
courtesy. If you go to news and announcements, we always have a public hearing link for each public hearing for this evening. And if you go there, you can see it. And then you can always call us at the office and we'll point you there. And then lastly, you can always come in, not lastly, you can always come into the office and we can show you the documents.
Okay, I apologize. I had looked on the planning board packet on the planning board's website.
Yeah,
and-
it's a little different than the select.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
Most of the good stuff is.
Sorry, Mr. Nuss.
I make a motion, we continue the public hearing for warrant article 1, tree protection bylaw, section 153 draft tree policy, draft tree fund language, to September 12th, 2022 at 7:10 PM.
Second. I have a motion in the second. Any discussion? All in favor, Latrell, yes?
Mills, yes.
Houlihan, yes. DeNario, yes.
Okay, the next is the opening of the public hearing for warrant article, I believe it's number 2, scenic roads.
I did not change my,
1 second, let's let Karina read her, let Karina read the legal announcement.
Yep, let me just give you a quick update. Getting faster at the. Okay, so again, in the efforts to have public transparency, the planning board decided to hold public hearings, even though this is not required for this warrant article. So the public hearing notice, Town of Southborough, the Southborough Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, August 22nd, 2022 at 7:15 PM in the McAuliffe Hearing Room, second floor, Townhouse, 17 Common Street, Southborough, Mass. 01772, to review a proposed general bylaw amendment for special town meeting warrant article to add chapter 154 scenic roads. The intent of the bylaw is to designate additional town roads not currently designated as scenic roads, other than those specifically excluded by state statute as scenic roads, under provisions of MGL chapter 40, section 15C, practicing sound planning principles, aesthetics, and preservation of natural resources, as well as public safety. A copy of the application and plans can be viewed at the planning office at the Southborough Townhouse during normal business hours or on the planning board's webpage. www.southboroughtown.com/planning-board. Any person wishing to be heard on the proposed plan should appear at the time and place designated or join the hearing by going online to www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. And then just a brief update. The legal ad was filed with the town clerk and was posted in the newspaper on August 8th and August 10th for a public hearing to open this evening on the 22nd. The legal ad was distributed to the towns and agencies as required, and as well as to the town departments with a draft warrant article that was previously in hand as a starting point. We did not receive any comments back from any of the town departments at this point. And that brings us to tonight, public hearing number 1.
Ms. Houlihan. Thank you. Colleen, would you be able to share my presentation? So just to prepare the planning board, so as you know, I had met with Conservation and Historic, and the conversation with the Historic Commission was actually a lively one, and I think worth my investigation. So the request was, the comment was, hey, I saw that you removed language that there are towns that we know of that have defined the word scenic. So can we see those and just do a little bit more diligence, and what does that look like? So based on that and some of the feedback from town meeting, that people feel that not all roads are scenic. The conversation that I wanted to raise today with you was to see if you would be willing to think about scenic bylaw and defining the word scenic. And so I will have provide, when we are able to share it, the other language that other towns, neighboring towns use to define the word scenic, and then what it would actually mean. So yes, rewind about 3 weeks ago, and I said it would be cumbersome for us to define the word scenic because it would require us to go back and potentially reclassify streets that don't meet the requirements. However, I think moving forward, it's something we should consider if it's something that we would like to try to see. If the 68 streets that are currently not identified as scenic, if we, I can't say whether or not town meeting would approve as they have in the past, but I think there was enough skepticism raised with some of the meetings with Conservation and Historic and the feedback in town that we should at least consider the path of defining scenic and seeing what that might be moving forward.
Colleen, can you find that PowerPoint?
I have it up. I'm just trying to figure out how to get it back on the screen.
Yeah, just click on the bottom somewhere. It should be across the bottom of your quick links.
Well, the law is funny here, and the law doesn't describe scenic. And so I am, I've seen people struggle with this because they have things in their mind, like it should be beautiful, it should be near a river, there should be an open field, there should be, something that they think is mainly maybe historic even. And I think what we're trying to do with the scenic road bylaw is consistency with the roads that are, remaining roads in town that are not designated scenic versus the ones we already have. I feel very strongly we shouldn't undo the protections that we already have. And if it means, withdrawing this bylaw, I think that we should keep the protections that we have. I feel that strongly. I did take a look, I think we'll take a look at your slides, and they're quite interesting. But what I think also we're trying to do is be consistent with Mass General Law. And Mass General Law defines a scenic road as having only 2 things. It has to have a tree and it has to have a wall, or have a wall, because it protects the public shade tree and it protects a wall. So it doesn't talk about having any other features of being historic or bucolic or anything like that. And I think that, you know, we're stuck with it, actually. And I'd be a fan of, you know, looking at the roads that are remaining, the 68, as, you know, how many of them are, for example, neighborhoods that are developments, A&R. These trees were purposefully planted for, you know, not just beautification, but for all the, you know, because they're for the public good. And I think that in any area, any neighborhood where the, you know, planning board has been, you know, party to that, we should protect those trees if they're in a development. Because I've heard also some of the feedback coming in that I live in a development, it's not really historic. I don't think we need to, you know, all that bureaucracy. Well, if that development was planned with trees, I feel strongly that those trees were intentionally put there for the public good and they should be protected. I did take a look at the list of roads that we're talking about for this bylaw number 2. And thank you, Karina. I think you separately sent a document that has all of our developments in town. And I didn't do all of them, but it's a lot of them. And so, you know, a couple of them are not in development, but very few. So I think that we've had such a problem. Mimi's described over the last 4 years, the troubles that we're having in protecting the trees that we know have protections, that it's become cumbersome to not have protections on every road. And especially where there's a development where it was identified to have trees for the public good, I feel very strongly we should protect those trees as if they're scenic roads. And one more thing, when we think about some of these roads that we never thought about as scenic, and I'm one of these people, I didn't even know St. Mark Street had was a scenic road. I should have known, but I never really thought about it. But when I thought about it, it was when the trees came down. And so for people listening at home, if the trees aren't protected, the stone walls aren't protected under the scenic bylaw, the stone walls can come down and the trees can be chopped down. And so this is, I think, in our town, what we're really trying to do is preserve you know, the beautiful nature of the town. Some of these trees and walls are historic, but some of them are not, and the law allows that. So to be completely aligned with the law, we don't need to define. And in fact, I think we go in the opposite direction and start, you know, unraveling some of the protections that we already have. So I don't support it.
So thank you for that. And I think, you know, the question is, I think let's just go through the definitions and then see what you think. Because you can also just say grandfathered in those that have already been designated, we can designate it. And moving forward, this could move forward as you define what scenic is. But I think it's worth the planning board reviewing this. So these neighboring cities and towns have defined scenic, and I pulled out a couple example language, and then I'll give a little bit. Oh, sorry.
Neighboring.
Sorry, slide 6. I'm thinking I'm presenting slide 6.
Keep going.
Yeah, slide 6. There we are. So the kind of the attribute around trees. So the example definition, bordering trees of exceptional quality in terms of type, age, specimen size, or spread, density of stand or related flora. That's further elaboration than just trees for Hopkinton and Northborough. As Deb mentioned, the historic designation, some like Southborough said the road appears on a certain map. So it's a scenic thing. Age or historic significance of the roads, the trees, and the stone walls. The built features on those, such as the buildings or monuments, burial grounds, etc. Or the road features such as historic layout, surface, carriage width, use restrictions, non-historic bridges. And those are Ashland, Wayland, and Sudbury. And the third attribute that kind of stood out was bordering vegetation or other features to consider. And those are these ways bordered by any other natural or man-made features of aesthetic value, orchards, fields, and forests, ways for which alteration is being planned or is likely to be planned in the future, which again, if we did define scenic, I would want to include these last two, ways for which any alteration would lessen the aesthetic value or of natural or man-made features bordering them. because it's a little more of obscure, I guess, language. It's not so defining and subjective. Slide 7. These are the actual language. Oops, sorry, I'm sorry. So this is the actual language in Hopkinton and Ashland. And so they all include the trees and the stone walls. So they've all added on to the definition to what already exists in Mass General Law. And then the next slide, if you guys have had a chance to read, shows Northborough and Marlborough. And Marlborough really just further defines the roads, the stone walls, with no other additions. Except they've added some kind of bylaw language in there for the tree trunk. Removal, things like that.
Marnie, did you recognize in your research, like the quantity that the different towns actually had of scenic roads? I mean, that's a tough thing to say because roads are different lengths and some towns are much larger square footage, square area. But was there a general sense like, oh, well, this town looks like they have a lot of scenic roads. In this town, well, they have these definitions more and, they have a fewer number of scenic roads.
Yeah, I would say all 4 of these examples have very specific streets named. They did not necessarily go the route of Southborough where they designate all streets in the town as scenic. So they were very specific. So I would say they had tens, not hundreds.
Okay, that's what I was curious. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And so as I further considered what we're trying to achieve, the thought was, would we consider revising the bylaw language? And so that's the next slide. Oh, sorry, I forgot Sudbury and Wayland. I also did Sudbury and Wayland. And if you go back one more slide, Colleen, I won't belabor this too much. Sudbury is a little bit more specific. Sudbury also, like some towns, has applications to put your road on as a scenic road, so it's a little bit more of a formalized process. And then those are accumulated and brought to town meeting over the course of a year.
So those definitions seem very subjective to me, like your contribution to trees to scenic beauty, like I think all trees contribute to scenic beauty on all roads. So what's scenic to me isn't scenic to the next person, or so I think it would be difficult to do a definition that wasn't subjective, that someone wouldn't have an issue with.
So let's look at 10 on the potential language. So maybe the exceptional quality is something that could be deemed subjective. You could just say ways bordered by trees, ways bordered by stone walls, ways bordered by any other natural man-made features or aesthetic value.
Which could be any road.
It could be, yes.
One of them listed historic homes on it. And I'm thinking, I know all the houses that are historic are already probably designated as scenic roads, unless an access road goes in right next to a historic home and then it's up to.
Yeah.
So I would think we still want to keep that tag in there. I'm trying to think of. Skills, force, I don't think those are probably already covered. And maybe getting more specific to what we were talking about before. If it was deemed by a development that the trees had to go in, as part of the conditions of the development.
I'm having trouble hearing you, Andrew.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I said if,
Her headphones just popped off the side of her head.
sorry, Chris. A little punchy. I got up early this morning.
It's okay.
No, I was just saying that if it was a development and it was designated, the trees went in, that I think that should be clearly stated that that is an automatic qualifier for a scenic road.
So, having worked on this for 4 years, trying to get the town to comply with chapter 87 and the scenic road bylaw. Just to be clear, if a road isn't deemed a scenic road, those trees in the public right of way are still protected under chapter 87. So there's no, to the public, there's no additional paperwork or any additional regulation really. It's all internal and it's mostly on the planning board for scenic roads, which require consolidated hearings with the select board, who we now know are the tree wardens. So for me, having worked on this, it's about ease, making this process as easy as possible. And having all roads be scenic roads and all roads requiring a consolidated hearing so that our elected select board and our elected planning board are working together, I think is a positive thing. And some roads, so first, defining it is always going to be subjective. And if some roads are and some roads aren't, it's more difficult to figure out, you know, which route we're following. So if things become what I've learned over these 4 years, if things aren't absolutely crystal clear, then the entire lot is ignored and nothing is done. So I'm for clarity, make it easy, and I think having the select board and the planning board working together is a positive for the whole.
Just curious with the sort of progression of our process of working together with the select board. Have you gotten any comments from them on scenic road, this bylaw? Because I don't think they supported it. Is that right? The first time? And, you know, I wonder why they wouldn't support it since there's no burden to residents and there's no burden to them. It's easier for planning. So those are the pluses. So why wouldn't they support it? So maybe they didn't understand it because we didn't get the chance to tell.
John did talk to it. I'd say my recollection was that the thought that circulated in the room was that, hey, I live on a development and it's not that scenic. That it was more of the feeling that scenic is like a, you know, Deerfoot or a flag. It's not a, you know, stamped development that gets put down. So I think there was just consternation around, you know, if everything's scenic, nothing's scenic, I think was one of the quotes.
But so what? I mean, it's important to me that the trees and the stone walls have the additional protection. And everything in Southborough is scenic. Is that bad advertising, or
Southborough is beautiful.
is our house values going to go down if every road in Southborough is a scenic road? I don't think so.
No, they're gonna go up.
I agree with you. I just, from the last town meeting, it seemed like there was a lot of pushback on it. And there was, you know, I was trying to think of if we could come up with, I criteria that actually gonna encompass everything from for the last 60 new roads that came before the planning board. We designated trees got there, so then boom, they automatically become all trees. Right? That's what I was kind of thinking. Because I think if people would have a tough time arguing, like, okay, if the town mandated that those trees get there, then public shade trees, they should have the extra protection, and yes, it should be seen. Hold on, you know what, all 68 qualify. Okay.
If we could do that, I'd go along with that. So these are the qualifications and look at, they all qualify.
Which is the ways bordered by trees, and maybe we just remove the exception of quality, or I think it comes back to the conversation which I wanted to have, like, or do we just not qualify it? We keep it as it is and we move forward and maybe emphasize the fact that they're designated road scenic, doesn't do any, it places no burden on residents, to your point. It really places the burden on the planning board and the select board as the designated. So I think it's the select board that we need to gain the buy-in, to the willingness to say, okay, all roads are scenic. And then I think we just see where we go from the public hearings to see what the feedback is. And then I think if we, if we think it's going to pass that way, we can proceed. In this proposal, I was going to drive around and actually see where those 68 streets fell. So I'm willing to still do that. But I think it's worth a discussion to say, do we bother, or do we just go back to leaving it broad and undefined as we've had it since our inception, or 1974.
Do you think that I forget the word I was just gonna say, the resistance for the warrant article with the list of trees that was proposed, it was the quantity? If the planning board took on maybe 20 or 30 streets at once instead of such a large number, where it kind of eased in and people would see that it's not as great an impact to them as they fear it is. I don't know, just food for thought.
The impact is already on over half the streets in Southborough currently.
Right, true.
And for a resident, there's no additional impact. All trees in the public right of way are protected.
Correct,
Unless-
that's right.
The only difference is if they want to remove a stone wall.
Right, there's a public
It may
hearing.
become- It may be convoluted with the public shade tree bylaw. I think the fact that they're coming together, I think it also confuses people. So maybe we just simplify. I mean, what I'm trying to do is compromise. I'd love for historic conservation and planning board to make a bold statement as a team together. And I think that historic made me scratch my head and think about it. I am invited to go back tomorrow night, and I will, kind of with the feedback from this board. And I think it continues to be discussion, but ideally I'd love to have a compromise and just be able to come together as three committees in town that are able to kind of come to a consensus and work collaboratively together. I think that's my ultimate goal. And show that it actually can work. People can work together. It's an amazing concept, I know.
I think it's an interesting angle to kind of focus more on the administrative part of it. Like, I think about like town clerk and others who get up and say, hey guys, this is just an administrative procedure. It makes it easier for the town clerk's office. And everybody says, yeah, okay, easier for them, that's great. And we don't really sometimes get into all the details. And in a way, that's what this is, because, I'm afraid actually, and I don't know if the historical commission or conservation commission thought that if you define scenic in a way that's different than the law, well, first of all, I don't think it's just a good idea, but you're now defining these 68 moving forward, and that doesn't necessarily fit to the ones that are already, you can't go back and say, they meet all of the, let's just say we go into these 5 criteria. The roads that are already designated scenic may not fit this criteria. So I don't think we can ever really define scenic, to be honest. It's an unfortunate word. Maybe years ago it was used in a different way, and I can't think of a better word. I think that people shouldn't get hung up on, whether it's beautiful or historic. I think most people do.
I would agree with you.
Yeah,
I think
and it's
that's what
not really, again, what we're trying to do with this bylaw is just align with Mass General law. And make it easier for us to do our job and for the town to do our job. And, we have to be partners with, our other boards and committees, but also DPW. And it is really confusing. I mean, if we think about just the short time that I've been on the planning board and a couple of tree hearings that I've participated in, there's been kind of like little glitches along the way. And it's confusing. So whatever we can do to make it, more plain, easier, straightforward, that's what we should do. Why do we have to make it any more difficult? And it doesn't cost anything to the public, doesn't require them to do any paperwork. We're just asking them to agree that, we need their help to make it much more streamlined so that, this public assets get protected.
So what will I go back to Historic Society with? Are you guys in agreement with Deb?
Commission.
Historic Commission, sorry. Which is just basically defer to what it was original, what Don had proposed.
Unless, if you want to, if it makes people feel better to have some type of criteria that all the streets fall within. Because I would not want to wind back anything.
And I would remove that B then, that we would be able to reevaluate the foregoing criteria. So basically you'd almost say like existing scenic roads will all be grandfathered in this date moving forward, the criteria moving forward. But I think what I'm hearing from you is that the criteria? What I've heard from you is you don't want more criteria because this is adding more definition than the Mass General has already provided.
That's what I think.
But if it makes people understand more, if this is sort of generally what a scenic road is, and all the roads in Southborough happen to be that, then
The new ones.
all of them, including
Well, we're not gonna talk, we're not gonna talk about that existing.
right, because they're just.
Say,
They'll be grandfathered in.
yeah, they all be grandfathered in, the criteria. Because I think that would solve, from what I heard at the last time meeting, I think that would solve a lot. Look, here's our criteria. You know what, look at all the new roads that have to be 68, meet this criteria. So we'll propose it be 68.
Well, I have a question. One of the criteria is ways bordered by stone walls. Are those stone walls on private property and town right away? When it says ways bordered by trees, are those ways? Are you considering just what's in the town right away?
I think so, that's what Mass,
Mass General
yeah, that's what Mass.
Can consider.
Yeah, you can't talk into private.
Right,
It can only be.
Right, but when you designate a road scenic, it's, for example, like Chestnut Hill Farm, when they were doing the barn restoration. And maybe I'm just confused, but I felt like there were bigger bird's eye picture of what was scenic there. Yeah, there's a stone wall and there are trees, but is the barn being placed where it blocks scenic views? Are the trees coming down on site? And again, it was site plan approval. So I'm not, in Mass General Law, Chapter 4015C for scenic roads, it says, the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Historical Commission of any city may designate any road in the city or town other than a numbered route, etc., a scenic road. But you don't just want to say, are you tying it just to stone walls and trees on the town right away? I can hear that question coming up, someone saying, well, that, but that stone wall is, not on town property. Why is my road scenic? You'll have the walls meander in and out, and some people will say, oh, that's doesn't impact, it shouldn't impact me. My wall's not, I don't know. It just seems like I just
We're
want to,
talking about the public right of way.
yeah. I know the application applies to that.
In Chestnut Hill, the barn and the scenic views and all of that, there's a TR on that property.
Conservation restriction, right?
Yeah,
Stone
that
wall.
speaks to the stone walls and the scenic views that have to
Okay.
be preserved.
So that was more specifically detailed previously anyway. Okay,
And this isn't suggesting must have, these are criteria which shall be considered. So you could have trees on one and stone walls on another, but you might have a tree, you might not have stone walls on the street, and you might still designate as scenic. So it doesn't meet the requirement of all 5 criteria, I think is the point.
and border, does that mean 1 tree or 20 trees? Like, I'm just kind of throwing the devil's advocate out there. Like, if there's one really fabulous tree, do you designate the whole road scenic for that tree? I mean, I know that's an extreme view, but, or do you generally say, okay, it's scenic because there's over 20 trees on that street that really add to the charm of that street?
I think that would be in complete opposite of what Deb's trying to suggest, that you
Right.
would quantify that, yes. So I think
Right.
if it could be easier, we can do a parens, tree S.
I do
Yeah.
see your point though, Karina. I mean, I think your point is well taken that if we define it, somebody's gonna have difficulty with the definition. And I think that's the beauty of the law. It's so vague. It's not defined. So that's kind of one of the reasons I think that we shouldn't even define it and say this is just an administrative process to help the plan.
Yeah, well, the state left it up to the cities and towns to decide what they. Yeah. Anyone in the public? Sure.
Grant Farrington, 58 Flag Road, member of the Historical Commission, but speaking in my private capacity. So I'm in favor of this bylaw. I think a lot of it comes down to how you frame it. And that's where I think a lot of the trouble came at town meeting. One aspect of the presentation of the tree protection bylaw that I like is what does it do and what doesn't it do? And I feel like here you could say, what does scenic mean for the purposes of this bylaw? What does scenic not mean for the purposes of this bylaw? Scenic doesn't mean pretty, beautiful, bucolic, nice to look at. You could list all the terms about what it doesn't mean. And you could say, for the purposes of this, scenic means, increased protection for trees and protections for stone walls that don't otherwise exist, just to make it clear, because I think that wasn't clear for some people at town meeting. Another thing is that, looking at the list of the scenic roads, of the proposed 68 roads, and when they were built. Some of them were built, in the late 80s, 90s, which was 30, 35 years ago. And so if you drive on those roads today, they do have quite beautiful trees because, they've been around for so long. And so, I think a lot of this is being talked about kind of theoretically about, oh, I live in a subdivision, so we don't have trees, or we don't have pretty trees. But if you go and drive down Presidential Drive, which I think was from the 90s, I'm not sure where it is now.
Yeah,
95. There are some pretty big trees on that road that I think deserve to be protected, and I think you can maybe use it as a potential rhetorical argument. Another aspect is that, this is something that historical has been discussing, is that as time progresses, we were talking about it in the concept of architecture, that our conception of what a historic house is changes, and we were talking about pretty soon kind of post World War II housing subdivisions might be considered to be historic homes, and just the way that they if they're 75 years old, we might not conceive of them that way now, but as time progresses, that could happen. And so if you have these protections in place, even though the trees might be small or ugly or whatever right now, then the protections are there for them to grow and become historic trees later on. So those are just a few of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I really like the means and doesn't mean. Great suggestion.
Anyone on watching us on Zoom would like to comment, please raise your hand.
We currently have 4 attendees and no hands raised. Oh, we have a hand just went up. I think I woke somebody up.
The chair of the historic.
Hi, Planning Board. Good evening, and thank you for taking my comment. It's interesting discussion, and I'm certainly engaged by it. I wasn't asleep, actually. Can you hear me okay?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can, yes.
Yes, are you speaking as a resident or as?
Yes, I am speaking solely as a private citizen and not as the chair of historical. I want to be clear about that. Some thoughts about this matter of definitions. First of all, I want to say that my private citizen comments are made as a friend and fan of the planning board and someone with immense gratitude about the planning board's efforts to protect trees and scenic roads and stone walls in this town, and believe very strongly that your efforts have had an immensely positive impact on the climate for public shade trees and stone walls. But on the matter of definitions, I make these remarks trying to anticipate what I think you may face at a special town meeting in the fall. So, with regard to the scenic roads bylaw, I would note that when you go back to the tree protection bylaw, you define public shade tree, public right of way, Southborough tree fund, topping, tree city, what a utility is, what a drip line is, what tree removal is. But then when you get to the scenic roads bylaw, it's only defined by what it is not. It's not pretty. It's not all the things that we're told that it isn't. And then if you look around at other towns that do make the effort to simply define it, it seems problematic. I mean, in the public shade tree, Chapter 87 MGL, Chapter 87, they define what a public shade tree is. So it's a fairly, typical thing to define your terms. So I'm just anticipating the objections of someone to a scenic roads bylaw that actually doesn't mean anything. It means all roads in Southborough, and it's flattering to think that all roads in Southborough are scenic. But if you're going to be honest about it, it's really so that it can funnel all the roads in town under the proposed tree protection bylaw, at least as I see it. And again, I'm just trying to anticipate what the objections are going to be. And I'll hold on that. I was going to make a comment on the tree protection bylaw itself, but I was a little slow on the button. I wanted to hear everybody else first. So I can hold those comments until another time, but I do have some thoughts on that as well. And again, trying to anticipate what I think you're going to face in the fall. But Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
So you have the direction you need?
I'm not sure I do.
This is a hearing. Shouldn't we hear Mr. Miller's comment on the bylaw?
That bylaw, that hearing,
That hearing.
will continue.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think it comes down to tactics on how we think it's gonna get passed. So, again, what I remember most was people saying, you know, what's the criteria, how do you come up with everything? And that's where I thought they got the most momentum to postpone it. So for me, it would be, to get by that hurdle would be to give the criteria, say, here's the criteria we looked at, and boom, you know, these are the roads we're suggesting that meet the criteria. We don't even say this. We'll say these are the roads. That, I mean, and we could then add on that this is an administrative thing, so we can make sure we manage the roads all equally. Like the two-pronged approach. But, you know, I'm not married to it. but that's fine.
I tend to agree. Yeah, there was a lot of, yeah. I'm trying to think how to address that. A lot of people hung up on what. But there were a lot of comments about trees within the right of way that they felt they controlled, which scenic or not, they do not.
Yeah, the public right of way came in big on that as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I think it just got very confused and convoluted and things got. So let me do this. I'm gonna go to the historic commission meeting tomorrow night. I'll share the feedback. I will look at the criteria again, maybe that, to your point of adding something about the historic stuff, right? Historic might be defining, changing terms as each year that goes by. And I will take the effort to just look at all 68 streets and just see, you know, if those criteria shall be considered, right? Yep. And then I think this week is both historic and conservation. So I'll at least get the feedback, get an update. This is what I'm going to do. We still have a little time. When does the final warrant article have to be complete?
I think the warrant closes on September 7th.
The 7th, yes.
I don't have a lot of time before now. And are you comfortable? Well, I guess we are, when is our next meeting, the 12th, after the next warrant. So if we would have to have a meeting just to kind of come back with what I've heard and what the language would be to propose, would you be willing to have a quick off?
A Zoom?
A Zoom, yeah.
You don't have to come into. the
Okay,
office.
thank you. Perfect. So I know what the next steps are, and then I will report back and give you recommendation on what I've heard from the other.
Okay.
Okay.
So how do I make a motion to continue this public hearing if it could be before the 12th?
Did you hear that question, Karina?
Can we select a date that's before the 12th?
Let me look here.
And Marty, I would defer to you to when you think you'll have everything ready. I wouldn't want to say, oh, let's do it before.
So remember, note that the 5th is Labor Day. So that's a holiday. Today is the 22nd. So it would be the week of the 29th,
Have to be next week.
because you have to have time to actually have a
Draft.
draft so that it gets submitted.
Right. Could we do it on the Thursday or the Friday?
The first or second?
Yeah, the first or second,
The second, I'm going, but the first.
like sometime in the morning.
Sure.
Morning stuff for me, but.
I can do
Like before 9:30. We made it like a quick meeting. Would you want to schedule like 8:30 work, 8:30 to 9:30?
Yeah.
Okay, there's three of us.
I might be able to do that.
Okay.
Okay. So I make a motion that we continue the public hearing for warrant article number 2, scenic roads, for September 1st, 2021 at 8:30. What?
2022,
What did I say?
to 2021.
2022. For 8:30 in the morning. Remote.
Will that be a Zoom meeting only or a hybrid?
Zoom only.
Only.
15, 16.
And who seconded that?
Oh, second, sorry.
That's okay.
Ms. Houlihan. She was turning around, you couldn't hear
I have a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor, Latrell, yes?
her. Those yes.
Houlihan, yes.
Muriel, yes.
Very good.
And we'll have to let Jesse know because it's a morning meeting.
We're going to take a 2-minute recess.
Okay.
So,
You have to vote on a recess, right?
Do you have to vote on it?
Do we usually vote on a recess?
I
No.
think we do.
all in favor?
Latrell, yes.
Mills, yes.
Houlihan, yes. Muriel, yes.
yours.
Okay. Thank you. We're back from recess. Just want to note that Mr. Mills had to step away. We will continue on. We are back in session. And the next item on the agenda is 154 Turnpike Road site compliance scenic road tree removal.
We don't need to continue that because it was already continued to a specific date. Right there.
Okay, so that's being continued to September 12th. Do we need any update on that, Karina, or is that just continued to the 12th?
No, they asked to be continued to the 12th because they were out of town until tonight. And I expressed that they should be submitting the landscape plans and the other things that the planning board wanted to see to show what they're proposing there in lieu of exact compliance. So September 12th.
Okay, and the next discussion item is 40B residents at Park Central.
So just a quick update on that. We did receive an email from Mark Purple that I forwarded to the planning board members again, extending the comment period to, I believe it's September 22nd.
Yes.
And I believe the comments are being worked on by Marnie in the interim until there's some further information. I believe that there was a request for another site walk as well, or for a site walk, depending on the term site walk and if that was met as part of the criteria for the application. And that was referenced in the email as well. So we're waiting to hear back on that, and the next meeting, since it is the 12th, there'll be time for the planning board to discuss this on the next agenda as well.
So that was referenced in the email from Mark Purple that he's requesting another or a sidewalk.
Yeah, yes, let me just double check. Let me just pull my book out here. Open this up. And
Notice from Mark Busby, the Mass Housing granted extension to submit comments on the Park Central project Thursday, September 22nd.
And does it mention the sidewalk?
yes, in an email on August 10th from Mark Purple, Town Administrator, to the Select Board, the Planning Board, regarding Mass Housing comment period extension. The very last sentence was something to the effect of also requested a date for another site walk, one that actually includes walking the project site.
That actually includes, right?
So I think he was waiting to hear back
Very good.
from Mass Housing.
Do you want to ask if there's any public comment on Park Central that should be included in our letter? If it hasn't already been.
Does anyone have anyone in the public have a comment on Park Central that they would like?
We currently have 4 attendees and no hands raised.
And here at the townhouse, anyone?
The banging on the door.
Okay. Anyone on the board, or should we move to the next? Okay. And the next discussion is this school street stone wall scenic road.
Okay, hold on a second.
Yes.
I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, but we've been a little bit swamped at the office, and with my foot, I've been a little bit slow, but I'm working on drafting those letters for School Street and for St. Mark's Street at Marlborough Road, the 2 infractions on the stone wall, the public stone wall removals on scenic roads. So again, I will get that done and circulated to the planning board so that we can get that letter to the select board. regarding the planning board's concerns with those two impacted stone walls. So they're not forgotten, they've been falling on the back burner a little bit.
Okay. And the Davis Road Island removal.
So it's come to our attention that there was Davis Road, there was inquiry as to repaving Davis Road, or that's on a capital planning committee project list for the DPW, potentially coming up soon. There was an inquiry, it's my understanding, from a resident on that street as to whether that island could be removed. Davis Road was created under Southborough Estates subdivision back in 1986 timeframe. And there were approved subdivision plans and a decision. Part of the decision included a waiver for more than a 500-foot cul-de-sac at the time. The roadway is, I believe, is longer than 1,000 feet. And to mitigate that in Meet Town Code, section 244-13 streets indicates that there is the option, the option to have a double barrel roadway to mitigate roads in excess of the dead end deadline. So Davis Road does have a median strip, the entire length, which does contain trees and shrubs and fire hydrants. And so in order to just bring this to the forefront so it's not an after the fact, I spoke with town council at his office hours last week and asked him the question, what might be the best way to process a request like this, whether it's the town requesting it because they want to repave it and the island is not conducive to paving, or if the homeowners in that neighborhood who I think are covenanted to maintain that island, if they're asking to have it removed, what would be the best process for this to go forward so it's vetted in public? Town council indicated that he felt, just from a cursory view, he hadn't researched any deeds or anything, that a modification to a subdivision would possibly be the best way to handle that. That's way it's transparent. The public has a chance to chime in on their thoughts. There would be an understanding, does the entire neighborhood want this, who's involved in the covenant, or are there only select people who don't want it and want it removed? So I drafted an email today to the DPW, and there's another person, hold on. I just can't think right now. Here it is, Davis Road.
Fire chief.
Yes, the fire chief, thank you, thank you. Explaining, attaching the documents, a copy of the decision from 1986, copy of the subdivision plan, a copy of the design plans, this covenant that was recorded that indicates in it, I think it indicates that the public might be, the residents there would be responsible for maintaining that island. So a whole bunch of information. I copied town council just for his information, since I had asked him these questions. To get feedback from Karen on the status of the Davis Road being paved. Is it up and coming? Is it getting pushed off? And then from Chief Achilles, fire chief, as to his opinion on the public safety aspect of keeping or removing this double barrel road of Davis Road, and the hydrants located in the island. Karen Galligan from the DPW responded that it made sense that there should be a public process because of the waiver included in the condition and the decision of the subdivision approval. She didn't feel that the road would make this would make the current contract because of funding, and that they were switching to some kind of pavement management decision software that the DPW will be using, but it doesn't allow for the DPW to determine which roadways. It must have a built-in ranking system of some sort. And then the fire chief said in an email to me also, he didn't think it was a problem. He wasn't concerned with removing it, but he had to get back about the hydrants that are located there. And again, this is all very cursory upfront information, but the whole idea was that we get this topic into the various boards involved, like town administrator and the select board, if Mark passes it on, in front of public safety, so they can chime in on it and make sure that, you know, a process that is appropriate and required takes place. And so far, it seems that might be a modification to the subdivision if it is pursued to remove the island. So sorry, again, one long sentence, but the whole gist is to get this out into, to air it out, flush it out, vet it, and make sure we do the right process. And, you know, come together as town boards and committees to determine what is the right thing to do there.
Thank you, Karina.
You're welcome.
If I could just add on, I was watching Capital, which was discussing with Karen Galligan the streets to be paved, and this came up, and select board member Braccio said, shouldn't this go before the planning board? And the DPW superintendent said no. So that concerned me because it was a condition of an approved subdivision. And it's a requirement in our subdivision regulations that if a dead end road is longer than permitted, then it must have that two-barrel road. So the thought that you could just take it out and pave over it without any public vetting was concerning to me. So I asked the planning department to look into it and put this on the agenda. So there's a public process, but it seems from Karina's email that there seems to be more cooperation that this will come before the planning board.
Yes,
Instead of always saying this should have happened, to be proactive, to make sure something does happen that should.
yes, I think Karen also had the opportunity to talk to town council relatively close to when I talked to him. There was quite a good waiting line that day, but I talked to her a little bit and she was going to talk to him, town council, about the same thing. So I think it's kind of coming together like that.
There is a homeowners association too to take care of those islands.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, just to ask, like, if there's a restrictive covenant and a homeowners association, don't they have to actually put forward the request formally?
Well, I think it was a resident that put forward the request, and
Okay.
supposedly he spoke to other residents, but that's unclear. But it should be a public vetting process, as Karina said, so all the residents have a say. And there are questions of, so the homeowners are taking care of it, which I guess is very difficult. There's trees and shrubbery that are constantly being buried all winter with salt, so they, you know, are having a difficult time keeping them alive. So if that's where our street trees are in that island, they'll have to go somewhere else, I would assume. So there's just a lot of questions that need to be addressed. But most importantly, there needs to be a public vetting before the planning board if they approved subdivision road is being changed.
So just curious if that was, so Davis Road is not a scenic road, I don't think.
No, it's on that
But,
list.
but if it
Or it's
were,
on the list that was.
would a tree in the middle of sort of that island, would it be considered a public shade tree?
Yes, because it would be within the.
So it's the perfect example of why all roads in town should be scenic roads, because I sat through the meeting at capital planning on the 15th, and I heard that myself, and it's kind of unbelievable that we're still talking about DPW going in and taking down trees without checking with the planning board or the select board, that's the acting tree warden. This is a great example, actually, where it would be just much easier to say, check with the planning board or check with the select board. But it gets confusing. This is an example of how it gets confusing. It just does. And you keep coming up with this and it gets confusing, and a lot of us spend time about this. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that there were 2 meetings that capital planning group had on the, I think the 12th and then the following Monday, the 15th or something like this, where they discussed this. So the number of hours that are spent talking about things that, you know, of course, they were talking about paving the road. They weren't spending time talking about trees, but it should just be really easy, and it should be really clear what the process is. And if all roads were scenic, it would be easy and clear.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the advice of select board member last year. All time.
One more comment, I know we're running late. Just a quick question is, whose dime is that? Who pays for this?
We do.
So if this street, they just don't like it, it's an inconvenience for them?
Well, yes, and it's difficult keep maintaining the plantings in the island for obvious reasons. And it's difficult for the DPW to plow because you've got 2 narrow strips. So I think that's,
But it's part of our bylaw.
so it's part of the subdivision.
Right, that's right. So I guess, does that, I'm just saying, if it's precedent, if we do something, are there other subdivisions that this would affect? And then we start to see this mountain of requests come in. I'm just curious.
Yeah, but I heard also that it was the fire chief at the time, I think it was a request that they had, because it's a 60-foot road with a 10-foot median, I guess is what we call it, right, divider with the trees. And I thought it was a request that if there were a fire, that they could close off one and open the other. So what happened to that? I would imagine that that's still the case, that this is the preferred entry and exit, whatever, for the neighborhood. That I agree with you. I don't think that we should go changing developments if it's agreed upon as a covenant.
Well, I think first thing, if you are changing an approved subdivision road, removing something that was a condition of an approved subdivision, that it should come before.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you for intervening.
Right, and that was one of the questions I asked town council. I said, you know, because the road was accepted as a public road, does that change the jurisdiction? Shift it from planning board to select board? As, you know, as like the St. Mark's Street relocation, you know, fell under select board, but also MGL indicates that it should come before planning board at some point. So just looking at the information, town council, you know, was leaning towards the modification as the proper, more appropriate way for this, because the decision, the way it was written, and the condition, and you know, the subdivision regulations.
Good. Thank you. Does anyone else have any comment on this? Next discussion, National Grid tree vegetation, maintenance, tree removal.
Yeah, so I can give you a quick update from my end is that we're still working to connect with National Grid, David Donahue, between vacations back and forth and my injuries and such. My goal, as I mentioned at the last planning board meeting, is to touch base with him in order to promulgate maybe a meeting with a group from our town and them in order to talk about this and the vegetation management plan and the hazard management plan and the information that they've provided and just moving forward. Maybe, you know, when you meet in person or maybe over a Zoom meeting or whatever, you get to see the people and the faces and you can work things out sometimes a little easier. So my goal is still to reach out to him, to make a connection, to make sure that, you know, they move in the right direction for the scenic road public hearings that have to be held for their tree trimming and removal. And I think Mimi, you have an update on having talked to Mark about the vegetation management plans.
Yes, I met with Mr. Purple and with Select Board Member Braccio on last Friday, the Friday before. There was a question from the tree warden designee who got a request from National Grid to do tree trimming on scenic roads. He wanted to know what the process was. So he sent it to Mark, and Mark asked to discuss that. And so it's on scenic roads, tree trimming is considered maintenance within the right of way, so an hearing is required for the planning board. So he was going to communicate that back to National Grid. And in that conversation, he also indicated that he did request a vegetation maintenance plan and a hazardous tree removal plan. So the pieces are all starting to come together, and when we all work together, we're all talking to each other. These things all seem to fall into place. So the next item discussion, accessory apartments. You're muted, Karina, if you're speaking.
Sorry. I think you reached out to Andrew Dennington, right, Mimi, and he responded that a working group might be a good idea.
Yes, so at the last meeting, I had asked this board if they'd be amenable to looking at amending the accessory apartment bylaw at the request of Select Board Member Dennington. So after the meeting, I got back in touch with him and said that the planning board was amenable and it's what are the next steps. And he envisioned someone from the planning CBA, who's someone from CBA brought this up initially, and someone from the select board working on something and bringing it back to each of those entities. This would be for annual town meeting. Yeah, I haven't heard back from him since, so I assume nothing's going to happen on this until after discussion time. And the next discussion item, environmental controls bylaw.
So I don't have much of an update. I had proposed to the board an environmental controls bylaw that's not only sort of addresses industrial noise, but odor. Just as an FYI, that this would be something potentially for an annual town meeting, not special town meeting. If the board chooses to continue to work on this, I have a little homework and I have been looking at other towns that have this similar sort of bylaw, I think I've done Medway, I think, and some others. I just informally brought it to Board of Health, to Public Health Director and the Chair of the Board of Health, and they have come back with questions. So I don't really have an update, but slow moving probably again till after the special town meeting.
And we've been carrying this on the agenda just for that follow-up. So in the interim, maybe we can take it off the agenda until Debbie gives us the go to put it back on when you have more information. Would
Yeah,
that
we
work
could-
for you, Debbie? Okay.
Yes.
I just hate to have people come in just to hear, you know what I mean? If we put it on the agenda, people think it's going to be a big discussion and they're ready to go, and then they wait till 10 and then we say, oh, we're working on it, that's all. Because I knew
Yeah,
that
but-
was the case, but I just wanted you to have the chance to, yeah, okay.
So maybe the same with the sensory apartments.
Yeah, we'll do the same. When there's more information, then we'll put it back on the agenda.
Okay. And just as an aside on noise, Board of Health is meeting with Ken's tomorrow morning. In the last discussion item, reappoint Marnie Houlihan to the Research Committee. So do we just need a motion for that?
Yes,
Can you make that motion? Mr. Maria?
My first motion on this board. I make a motion to reappoint Marnie Houlihan to Deed Research Committee member.
Second.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second and discussion. All in favor, Latrell, yes?
Houlihan, yes.
Demiria, yes.
I will get sworn in, I promise, by the deadline this time.
did Andrew left the meeting, right? I didn't catch
Yes.
that, I'm sorry. Okay. Right after the 2-minute recess?
That's why he called the 2-minute recess. So he
Oh,
could,
okay. Okay.
Planners report.
Okay, very quickly, briefly, I can tell you that the MBT communities effort for zoning for a bylaw for towns to receive certain types of funding, they have provided an update to their guidelines based on all the comments that were received from the various towns. And it was approximately August 15th that he announced that the final compliance guidelines for the new section 3A of MGL chapter 40A enacted as part of the Economic Development Bill in January of 2021, which requires that an MBTA community shall have at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as a right and meets other criteria set forth in the statute. So they provided new guidelines. Just to recap, that Southborough is a commuter rail community along with 68 other communities, and you must submit an action. MBTA communities must submit an action plan to the Department of Housing and Community Development by January 31st, 2023, and achieve full compliance in accordance with the following timetable for commuter rail community, December 31st, 2024. So I believe we distributed that to the planning board members, and I believe I also forwarded to Mark Purple and Select Board Chair Kathy Cook, so they're in the know. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention here. They modified some of the criteria, and some bullet points were in the information that I sent you. Several changes requested during the public comment phase included but not limited to revised community categories. They eliminated the bus service category. Significant adjustments to small and rural towns with no transit stations, And I note that per the 2020 census, of a population of 10,450 people in Southborough with 15.7 square miles. Southborough has approximately 666 residents per square mile, and the thresholds for a small and rural town is less than 7,000 people or less than 500 residents per square mile. So that didn't include Southborough. Changes to the reasonable size criteria. It was 25% of the community of existing housing stock. The guidelines establish circuit breakers that prevent multifamily unit capacity from exceeding 25% of a community's existing housing stock, or the minimum land from exceeding 1.5% of its total developable land area. Today I got some information comparing the subsidized housing inventories from 2014, 2022. I think there were only 8 other units. Approximately 10 units were added since 2014. And we can go into that further when we look at that closer. There were changes to tailored district location requirements, the portion of multifamily zoning district that must be located within a half a mile. So based on certain criteria, that shifted depending on the community with less than 100 developable acres within a half mile of a station will be free to choose any appropriate location. If you have other criteria, it went down from 50% contiguous to a lower number. And then multifamily unit capacity tool, they provided some kind of calculation applications for unit capacity. And I don't want to keep going on, it's based on GIS mapping, but if you have questions on that, you can give me a call and we can go over it together and look at it. But in a nutshell, those were kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major areas of changes in the guidelines. And again, that's kind of fast, and that's what I have on that.
Can I just ask a really quick question?
Sure.
It's the whole point of this is to allow multi-housing unit housing by right. They basically said if you don't have developable land near transit, then it can be really anywhere in your town. So don't we meet the requirements with our zoning bylaw right now with the downtown district where we have?
It's not 15 units per acre.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Next.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing in detail, but I did read the bullet points, and it didn't seem like any of the changes would have any positive effect on Southborough.
That's right. That's right. That's what I felt as well, because it said like communities with more developable station area land will be required to have more of their multifamily districts within a half a mile of the transit station. A community with less than 100 developable acres within a half a mile of the station will be free to choose any appropriate location. So, you know, those calculations have to be kind of determined where we fall.
Hopefully by the time all these multi-family units get built close to transit stations, transit will work.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, focus on what matters first. State.
Yes. Okay, and again, the warrant closes on September 7th, 2022. Select Board will sign the final warrant for the special time meeting on September 20th, 2022. So just to reiterate that as part of the planner's report. And that's all I have. And we only have one set of minutes this evening. Bridget is finalizing the August 1st. Colleen prepared the July 11th, so they're ready to be reviewed. And we did recognize one change that Mimi brought our attention to, and that Colleen had told me already, and I convinced her the other way, that when someone recuses themselves, they're not included in the vote. So I had Debbie in there as abstained on some of them. So I know better now. So we have the July 11th meeting minutes.
And one other, did you get my other edit on the stamp letter certifying? on
Yes,
one-
I fixed that as well. We're missing our motion maker.
So so just to clarify, I requested two edits. One was that the extension, that a note that Mr. Murray recused, and there wasn't a vote to abstain. And the other was on 154 Turnpike Road, just to clarify that we were looking for a stamped letter by a land surveyor certifying that the tree, by the tree, not a publisher.
So I make the motion to approve the minutes from July 11th, 2022 with the edits that Ms. Latrell just reviewed. Do I have a second?
Okay, we have a motion in a second. Any discussion? All in favor, Latrell, yes.
Houlihan, yes.
Demiria, yes.
The next meeting is September 12th. September 1st. Oh, September 1st. Forgot about that already. September 1st,
8:30 a.m.
one warrant and one
Scenic road.
agenda item, scenic roads, 8:30 a.m. And then the next full meeting is September 12th. Thank you, everyone. Anything from anybody else? Have a good night. Oh,
We need a motion to adjourn.
one moment. We have a comment from our full audience here. You can fight your way up through the crowd, Mr. Barrington.
Grant Farrington, 58 Flag Road. One thing I know that Karina had mentioned earlier was the St. Mark Street stone wall, and I'm not sure what you guys are thinking about that. I hadn't seen your previous conversation, but one thing that I'll just say as a member of the St. Mark Street Park Working Group is that we have engaged, or I guess technically the select board engaged a landscape designer to come up with some new plans for the parcel, and he came before us in our last meeting a few weeks ago and said that the any, I guess, reintroduction of the stone wall there would impact any plans that he made. So I don't know if that would, change your, or not change, but impact your decision making. Just I don't know what the timeline of the design process is going to take, but just thought I would let you know.
Oh, okay. So that we were going to write a letter to the select board, making them aware that there was a removal of a stone wall.
Oh, okay.
Which was in violation of the West General Law, chapter 48, 15.
Okay, I thought I would just mention it because he mentioned it specifically. I can't remember.
So he said any replacement would impact, like, what does that mean? That they're going,
Well, if I guess it would be you, if you were to vote to replace the stone wall exactly as it was, which I'm not saying you are inclined to do so, but that would have an impact on, the design of the park. So I don't know how long the design process is going to take, or
yeah.
but I thought I'd just let you know in case that might impact things.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I will get that letter drafted tomorrow and out to this, to the select board. So I'll get that out to the planning board. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have to make that motion?
Yes.
I make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion in the second. Any discussion? All in favor, Latrell, yes.
Houlihan, yes.
Demiria, yes.
Thank you. Good night. The planning board is adjourned.
thank you. Thanks, Colleen.